A deep dive into the Martha Moxley murder, the unbelievable twists and turns over 50 years in the murder in Greenwich on Halloween Eve, known as Mischief Night, in the exclusive Bellhaven Enclave in Greenwich. A whodunit that never ends, featuring speaking out for the first time ever, Michael Skakel, who was convicted 25 years after the murder, only to have his conviction vacated on appeal after serving 11 years in prison. All of this on this edition of Jim Campbell Radio. Andrew Goldman, renowned interviewer, veteran magazine journalist, editor, creator, writer, host of the NBC hit series Dead Certain, the Martha Moxley Murder. The 12-episode series re-examines the infamous 1975 killing of the 15-year-old Martha Moxley in Greenwich, Connecticut, again featuring never before heard audio from Greenwich police interrogations right after the murder. Andrew Goldman, the host of the Originals podcast. His work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal Magazine, LA Magazine, Town and Country, the New York Times Magazine, and New York Magazine. Welcome, Andrew. An honor to have you.
My pleasure to be here. It's great to be with you.
It's interesting because we have kind of a mirror relationship deal. I have come to know Tommy Skakel pretty well, and I know the Moxleys well, and you've obviously come to know Michael well. Interesting, Tommy came out of an interview I did with Bobby Kennedy that he reached out to me and said, good interview. And then we ended up becoming friends. He's always kind of said that if he speaks, he'll talk to me. I have not pressed him on that up to this point. As I've told him, it's going to be his decision, not mine. And I got to tell you, this was an outstanding piece of work. Psychologically, it took me a while to want to listen because obviously I found you were the ghostwriter of Framed, Bobby Kennedy's book, which I'm not a huge fan of. And I found it saying, well, how's he going to be able to be neutral? He's not going to be objective. Can I listen to this? And I listened to it. I'm wrong. You did a tremendous job. How did you separate the work you did for RFK's book? Were you a fact checker on that? Do you have an NDA or anything? How did you stay objective in your own project?
I had an NDA with my conversations specifically with Bobby, so you didn't hear Bobby's voice from any of my conversations with Bobby, and you didn't hear audio from my interviews that I did for the book. Bobby came to me with an idea in 2015 that he wanted to do a book about his brother Michael not being guilty, and that was the first hurdle for me because I had followed the media and I had I didn't follow it quite as closely as I did OJ, but I followed it closely enough so that I thought that if they were going to try Michael Skakel in 2002 for a 1975 murder, they must have had some good stuff. They must have had a fairly good case. And if you read the media and if you watched court TV and you listened to the Nancy Graces of the world, I think that I was under the impression that Michael was likely guilty. And so I had a moment where I thought to myself, geez, look, magazine journalism, even in 2015, it's not what it is in 2024, but it was still tough. So I was at a moment of liberty, as they say. I had some time, and it was a really interesting case, but I struggled because I didn't want to do what I think generations of journalists have done before, which is to whitewash kind of bad deeds from, Kennedy's and Kennedy relatives, going back to JFK, and of course, Chappaquiddick, William Kennedy Smith. I feel like there was, the so-called Kennedy machine working hard to help a number of Kennedys escape justice. And I felt, as had been played in the media, that Michael Skakel was yet another one of these people who ultimately failed to escape justice using the great Kennedy machine. That was how it was played in the media. I read, before I got involved in the case, I read Len Levitt's book. Len Levitt obviously kind of owned the case for a long period of time, writing for Newsday. I read Mark Furman's book, which, for the first time, I think publicly cast Michael as the likely suspect over his brother Tommy, who'd been the longtime suspect. I read Greentown, which was the book by Tim Dumas. I read everything, and I read the clips, and I said, geez, am I really, really going to get involved in this case? Because I think conviction, especially Len Levitt's book, was fairly convincing. about Michael's guilt. And I said, do I really want to do this? And I don't know if you've experienced this before, Jim, but my curiosity, I think, trumped my my I don't know if you want to call it conscience, but I talked to my wife about it and I talked to my psychologist about it, and they said, why don't you behave as though you're a defense attorney, and why don't you sort of assemble the best case that suggests that maybe look at it, look at the case. And at that point I went deeply into the case, and when I met Michael for the first time, as I say in the podcast, and I shook his hand, I was convinced that I was shaking the hand of the man who had held the club that had beat Martha Moxley to death. And it was a really disturbing experience. But then I went to Rockville Superior Court, and this was after Michael's habeas petition was granted, and all of the papers from the golf club was the evidence was there. Thousands of pages of police reports were there, and evidence from all of his appeals. And I started going through it, and I spent weeks and weeks on it, and I just kept flipping and waiting for the point where I was going to see the evidence that Michael did it. And I never found it. And to this day, I haven't found it. And as I told Stephen Skakel and I told Michael Skakel, I'm going to spend a lot more time than I spent on Bobby's book looking at this case. And if I ever find some evidence that suggests to me that Michael is the guy, I'm going to report it. There's no way. And I think Stephen Skakel, who's Michael's younger brother, who in a lot of ways has been the manager of the case and Michael's protector, and Michael's, he provides Michael advice, and Stephen's the one who goes to all the meetings to find new lawyers. This is not something that I think Michael would thrive at. Stephen's very, very organized, and he has a long record in the nonprofit world. And Stephen said, have at it. Look as much as you can. And I wouldn't blame you if you found something. But Stephen was so convinced of Michael's innocence that he really opened up. He opened up not only archives that he had, but private correspondence that included correspondence from the family lawyer, Tom Sheridan. And so I got to see everything, and I got to see the perspective of the father, Rush Skakel, who Mark Furman believed was quarterbacking a conspiracy to keep Michael from justice. And I didn't see the narrative.
That's not correct.
Yeah, well, that was not correct. But nothing, but very, very little of what was reported was correct. And, I think if you listen to my 12-part podcast, and it's funny, I go on social media, and there are people who are still citing Furman's book, who are still citing Dominic Dunn's reporting on it as a defense for the initial conviction of Michael. And I just feel like I took 12 hours, and I don't know, Jim, how you felt after those 12 hours, but I don't know that you could emerge from that and still have any kind of confidence that Michael was the guy.
I'll tell you where I come out of it is kind of where I've been all along. First off, all these other killers and stuff, the caveman, the tutor, we can talk about them. I view that as Bobby Kennedy's version of the 2020 Trump election, where you just keep going to conspiracy theories, even though the truth is sitting right there. And the truth to me, and it will go on, is it's either Tommy or Michael, and there's nobody else. And it's a rage killing, which would lean towards one of the others. But we'll go into the details of that. And that's where I think is impressive about yours is you obviously want to solve this. You want to be the hero at the end, and you admit, I can't do it. I can't tell you whether Michael's totally innocent or totally guilty. And you called it just like it really is. There is reasonable doubt. And that's all there's ever going to be, I think. In fact, is dead certain meant to be a parody of reasonable doubt because there is no dead certainty?
Dead Certain was something that we came up with because NBC didn't like my original title, which was Dead to Rights, which was sort of ironic, which I felt like, the idea of dead to rights, and half the people I was shocked that it's funny dealing with young people. They didn't know what the expression dead to rights meant, but I thought there was a certain irony in the idea that they thought that they had this guy dead to rights, like they had the case down. But there's also a double entendre, which I think Michael was denied a lot of his rights. So Dead Certain was sort of a second choice. I don't think it's bad.
It's interesting. It's interesting the whole thing, and you do I think end up with a very honest um, final assessment. In the remaining minute of this segment, how'd you get Michael to talk, and how did you get access to all that audio, which is unbelievable?
I got Michael to talk because I'd gotten to know him during the work on Framed, and you asked me about Framed, and um, I did a lot of research for Frame. Bobby came with his opinions and with a draft of something that I think was more opinionated than fact based, and I kind of put some meat on the bones, and I kind of tried to look at a variety of people who hadn't been looked at before. And I'm really proud of the research that I did on the book. That said, and I don't want to betray any conversations that I had. My conclusions are different than Bobby's. Bobby's conclusion in the book is that he found the real killers, I should say. And I was skeptical of it, and the more reporting I did for Dead Certain, the more skeptical I became of the two killers from New York theory.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they were not in Bellhaven that night, and I've talked to some people there that what O'Brien is related was not true.
Well,
Anyway,
I mean, yes,
well, we have to
yes.
go on to the next segment, and we'll keep going because this is a great piece of work. I urge everybody to listen to it. We'll talk next segment, confessions or not. Executive producer and host of the NBC podcast Dead Certain, the Martha Moxley Murder, Andrew Goldman joins us. I want to jump in now to, the big allegation that the case was built around was that Michael had confessed left and right, particularly at this torture chamber he was in up in Maine. But there are some interesting facts about that. I heard Michael and yours described as Elon having that sign around his neck that said, "Ask me about my neighbor," or "I killed my neighbor," or "Did I kill my neighbor?" And it was good to hear that out of his mouth because I've read that and you don't know with all the stuff that came out of Elon whether that was really true. But here's my question on this stuff. He was not a suspect. He was not a public suspect. He had an airtight alibi all during that time that he was Elon. So where was that coming from? That there were suspicions, suspecting that he was the guilty one, and that he's even talking about it. When at that time, none of us would have even considered him.
Michael's story on this, and you're free to dispute it. I mean, I've seen alternate versions of it, but Michael has said, well, first of all, what I have to know about Alon is that
Yes.
Joe Ritchie was not particularly interested in gleaning the truth from his, you could call them students, but I prefer to call them inmates. There were a lot of things that you heard about in trial. Uh, it was a system, much like Synanon, of putting pressure on people, and the idea was that you were going to break these teenagers down, these drug addicted and troubled teenagers down to build them back up. And they would use pressure points, and some of the pressure points would be totally fictional. Like there was a girl who had chapped lips, and they would berate her and say, "Admit you got these chapped lips from performing fellatio on a lot of men. Admit it, admit it, admit it." And it was, she was a virgin. This was not a girl that would do that. Uh, it was very standard practice at Elan for them to sit down with their families and find out what pressure points might be effective with their students. So Joe Ritchie and the people from Elan sat down with Rushton Skakel and his lawyer, Tom Sheridan, and talked about the background of Michael. And they talked about this murder. Michael says very specifically that for the first part of the time that he was at Elan, and there were these sessions where they literally beat him trying to get some sort of confession, where they would say, "Admit that your brother Tommy had something to do with this. Admit that your brother Tommy killed Martha Moxley. Admit it, admit it." Michael, if you know Michael, it's not out of character, ran away from Elan 3 times, which is, I think, a cardinal sin there, and you get beaten mercilessly for it. And Joe Ritchie redoubled his efforts to abuse Michael. And Michael said after the last time he ran away, Joe Ritchie specifically said, "Fuck that. We're not, I'm sorry. Uh, to heck with that. We're no longer going to get you to talk about Tommy. You did it. We're going to get you to admit that you killed Martha Moxley." And I think if you look at all of the testimony, with the exception of 2 witnesses, they say the closest that Michael ever got at Elan to saying that he did it after being beaten both paddled and with fists by some of the older boys at Elan. The closest he ever got was to say, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And this was the kind of torture, I talked to one person who said, in 5 minutes, I would have admitted to anything they said, and Michael never admitted it. And at trial, there were many, many Elan witnesses that said that was the furthest they got at Elan is, I don't know, I don't know.
And yeah, and I'll say this. Let's say he did have real consciousness of guilt, which I think he has had in areas. It would be totally unfair to convict him with that kind of pressure. Just like Amanda Knox, who was tortured in Italy by just breaking her down. But these acting out things. The second big one to me is that again he has airtight alibi. He's in the back country watching Monty Python, and Michael and only Michael puts himself in the tree masturbating after he gets back, if he ever went, which I don't quite believe. But let's say he went. And that's again, you put yourself at the scene. And I read something that I didn't even know Mickey Sherman had said, which is that admitting being at the crime scene, masturbating in a tree the night of the murder was too much to overcome. Now, we both know he's justifying his losing. And in fact, when I said to Mickey when I interviewed him, well, if you believe that, then Tommy had to do it. And he didn't answer, but he said, yeah, basically. But there's another example. Why would you put yourself at a crime scene when nobody suspects you?
This is, I think, the central question of, one of the central questions of the podcast, and one of the reasons that a few of people who I really expect, journalists, listened to it and said they just can't get over the tree story. I have theories about the tree story. I spoke to a lot of kids from Greenwich. And if you go back and you look at a lot of the kids, their testimony at the time, these are 15-year-old kids who've had a friend of theirs murdered at 15. And I grew up in Portland, Maine, and we had a guy who was known as the Slasher, who injured a lot of kids, including a very good friend of mine. And I seem to remember very specifically it being so traumatic that wanting to kind of connect myself to this event in certain ways. And I think that a lot of the people that I interviewed wanted to connect themselves to the event. There was Jeffrey Byrne, who said the night of the crime, he was chased through the woods by somebody. And this is all in this is all after learning that Martha Moxley was killed. Michael Skakel, if you listen to his taped confession, it is about Michael being in this tree, masturbating. He says he didn't masturbate to completion. Masturbating in this tree and then hearing rustling in the bushes. Michael is talking about, and I think the purpose of him telling the story, whether true or not, was saying, I saw the killers. I heard the killers. I was this close to being killed. And, Peter Zaluka, Martha's boyfriend, when he talked about how if he'd only been over in Belhaven, he could have been killed too. I think Michael was trying to connect himself to this crime. I don't believe that Michael was masturbating in the tree under which Martha was found, because it would make no sense if he was trying to peep. I don't believe Michael was trying to explain DNA evidence that might have been found at the scene. Whether you believe Bobby Kennedy or not, Bobby said as soon as he got sober, Michael started telling him this tree story. If you don't believe Bobby Kennedy, maybe you're going to believe one of the prosecution witnesses, Michael Meredith, who was put on the stand, who said that Michael told him this tree story in 1987. And I talked to Dr. Henry Lee and I said, would somebody, the theory that the state has was that Michael was trying to explain away DNA evidence that might have been found at the crime scene. He told this story to Michael Meredith in 1987. And I asked Dr. Henry Lee, what was the status of DNA in criminal cases in 1987? The first ever recorded case was at the very end of 1987. Michael did not know about DNA. Michael was not trying to account for biological evidence at the scene. Why did he tell that story? I frankly wondered. The story came out after he was at Elan. These are the first times I know that the story came out. It came out after Elan. Frankly, I wonder whether it was that night or a different night he was in the tree. I don't know whether I fully believe the story at all. He stands by it. I don't think that he would have told the story had he thought that it was going to implicate him in the crime. But this is, I think, the one sticking point that a lot of people who still believe Michael killed her had. I recently did a podcast with four FBI profilers who went through all the. I supplied a lot of the evidence, the autopsy, the crime scene photos, and they went through it. And they basically said they deprioritized Michael as a suspect and just attributed it as a weird story. None of them put Michael at the top of the suspect list. And so if that's enough to convict somebody, a weird story about jerking off in a tree, I don't know about our justice system because that's
Yeah,
all they had.
I think it's of course I always thought that, I've talked to Tommy about it too because he changed his story, meaning he lied. And of course, Michael changed his story, and it relates to the Sutton report, which then would lead you to assume they were trying to account for DNA. Now, Tommy gave
But
me
Michael told that story long before
I
Sutton.
know. That's new news to me. Plus, what Tommy told me without violating his, our conversations are similar to something that you said in it, which is Russ Skakel's religious fanaticism,
Mm.
which
Well,
would.
I think that that's right. But I mean, I think when we're thinking about Tommy and we think about how tight this timeline was, I don't know if you agree with me, but the Greenwich police got a lot wrong. I think they got the time of death wrong based on the dogs barking, based on the fact that Martha had a 9:30 curfew, based on the fact that she'd blown her curfew earlier in the week and her mother had been irate. Based on the fact that at 9:30, when she was left alone in the backyard of the Skakel house.
All right,
Okay,
let's just
sure,
put the suspense right there.
sure. Okay,
Let that hang.
okay.
The man who got Michael Skakel to talk, Andrew Goldman. Let's jump right back into where you were on the night of the murder.
I think what you really have to think about in this case is the tightness of the timeline. The last time anybody reported seeing Martha Moxley alive was at 9:30 when a bunch of kids were in the Skakel backyard and two of them left. Helen Hicks and Jeffrey Byrne left because Martha and Tommy were becoming somewhat pretty flirtatious. And they left, and Martha said to Helen, "I'm right behind you." Um, so Tommy initially said, "I said goodbye to Martha at 9:30 and watched her padding through the leaves." Tommy subsequently, years later, he said that there had been no sexual contact. Years later, decades later, said he had been with her maybe 20 minutes longer than he had initially reported. And it's hard for him to really work too much with that timeline because they were seen together and she was seen alive at 9:30. And everybody has, and most people, and I tend to agree with it based on a variety of evidence, that she had to be killed at 9:50, around 9:50 or 10. So Tommy initially said, I said goodbye to her at 9:30. There was no sexual contact, and I watched her go. He subsequently changed his story and said, actually, I was alone with her for 20 more minutes or so, which would put him with her at 9:50. And said that there was consensual sexual activity, which involved mutual masturbation. It is a very, very tight timeline, and Tommy, in changing his story, put himself with her at the time that everybody believes that she was murdered. So I think that Tommy was either very unlucky and had this sexual assignation and watched Martha pad away, and somebody between the 200 yards between the backyard and her front door intercepted her and killed her. Or there's another story.
Well, I have my own version of what I think was happening there, which is and why the timeline is like this. Michael, jealous, in a rage, drunk.
Okay, but I need to
No, wait,
stop
wait,
you.
wait, wait. Let
Okay,
me
all
just
right.
finish that. Let me just finish
Okay,
that.
all right.
So the logic is he doesn't go to the back country, which again he may have gone, but I agree the timeline is 9:50. So he didn't go. He sees them in the bushes, picks up a six iron as soon as Tommy disappears, and
Okay.
therefore
All right,
the
Jim. So let me ask
9:50
you
would
this. You
fit.
know a lot about this case, but I want to ask you, what is your evidence? And if you say Andrea Shakespeare, I'm gonna blow my stack because
No, no.
Andrea Shakespeare.
First off, I'm not going to challenge reasonable doubt. Okay,
No, I
because
don't think it's doubt.
it's one of the. It is
I
one of
think it
those
was.
two guys. I
Yeah.
think Michael is more logical for a lot of reasons, just because of Tommy was having sex with her, and why would you kill somebody afterwards except for one reason? But and one of the things Bobby conflates is the degree of disturbance of Michael at that age and Tommy to a different degree. And whether it's Sissy Hicks or whoever, Michael was out of control, full of rage. I have people that I know who said he seemed psychopathic to them at the time.
Mhm.
And I know that you disputed in the case that he was killing animals with golf clubs, which is a sign of serial killers. I had a woman tell me, this is ironic. I did a show on the Percy murder. I don't know if you know about that, but in Chicago. And she was listening to call that she had a tip on it. But she said, Jim, I happened to live in Bellhaven at the time. And Michael and Tommy were both problematical. Michael was definitely sociopathic, whatever you want to call. He used to
Mhm.
throw stuff at the bus when we would get off. We were scared of him. And so, in any event, it's a matter of motive. Now, could Tommy have had a motive? I believe in only one way, is if he tried to have sexual intercourse and she said no, and he went out of control. Other than that, I think it's one of two guys, and one guy had more of a motive. Now I'll shut up.
Okay, so I just want to go over the motive of Michael Skakel first. Well, first of all, Mark Furman's book was the first one that blamed Michael Skakel for the crime.
Hmm.
Mark Furman's book, which was distributed in the Fairfield County State's Attorney's Office to all of the people who were working on the Skakel case, was used as I think a roadmap for the prosecution. The thing that Mark Furman never disputed was something that was never disputed by the police, which was that Michael went to Sursum Corda. He was 8 miles away
Right.
at 10 p.m. when the murder occurred.
Yeah. I don't believe that,
It
but
is
go
in the
ahead. Go
police
ahead.
it is in the police reports, and it says it has been established that Michael was at Sursum Corda. So I feel like the idea that the prosecution tried to say that they tried to have it both ways. They said Michael could have killed her when he came back at 11,
Yeah.
which would have meant that he would have had to witness something at 11 p.m. Martha would have been 90 minutes late for her curfew. Martha had no alcohol in her system. Her judgment was not impaired. She had
Right.
told Helen Nix, I'm right behind you. This jealousy that you're referring to, have you looked at Martha's diaries?
I haven't. In there, she says at certain point, not like you had, that Michael seems crazy or something like that. And Andrew, by definition, masturbating in a tree out of a window is an obsessive act, and it was for Martha. And it was after he came back at 11 o'clock. Now, I agree. I'm a facts guy, so I can't prove this and make claims. I don't believe he ever went to the backcountry just because of that. He's in the car. He's watching his brother fondle her. It makes no sense to me.
But where do you get that he's watching his brother fondle her?
Because
Where,
he was in the front seat with her, and he was upset about it. From what
this has not been
again,
in any of the police reports. This, I think, is a confection about the touching of Martha in the car. I think that there was definitely, after they left, the reason that Helen Nix and Jeffrey Byrne left the backyard was that they sensed something brewing with Martha. Did Michael? Perhaps he did. I mean, but I think that this obsessive act, there's a couple of problems with it. The first problem was, is Martha going to wait around to get murdered by Michael Skakel after 11
I don't
p.m.?
believe it happened then. So,
Uh,
I believe it was
so
9:50.
then you have to believe that he stayed.
Yes. And
So
I can't prove that. That's why it's reasonable doubt. That's what it is. I think it was, and if you've seen the pictures, I have too, of Martha after being killed, it was a rage killing. It was not the tutor who didn't know her. It was not cavemen who really weren't there. And it's a rage killing. So it's only one of two people.
yeah.
And
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think is one of the great tragedies, and I feel like you let Mickey off a little easy when you talked about a gross sense of injustice, and he was allowed to defend himself. I don't know if I changed your mind in the podcast. I honestly, if I didn't know any better, I would have thought that Mickey threw the case.
Well,
He did.
I'll say this: Mickey's defense was terrible. He was lazy. He ran off with some of the money. But this is a problem I have. Ineffective counsel is a very, very narrow, sleeping through it, no defense. Something is good. It is not. He had a defense, whether it was good or bad. And I've sat with Mickey. That was not fit the definition of ineffective counsel. Skakel's hired this guy. He was a clown. Everybody knows it. You call him a jokester. He would say I was in the top two or thirds of my class in Connecticut, and people wouldn't get it. The law school, that means he's in the bottom third, you know.
Yeah.
But ineffective counsel, to me, that was an abortion of justice. And maybe it was good luck because maybe he's innocent, but I will never buy that was ineffective. It was incompetent.
It was
Maybe
totally incompetent. Look, I'm not a lawyer, and I feel like Jeffrey Toobin is on your side. And Jeffrey said that he found a judge who believed that he was innocent and found a way to get him off. But one of the things that Mickey failed to do. Have you seen these photos? Have you seen this picture of Michael at 15? This was within a month of the murder.
I got to tell you, that's another theory that I do not buy, that he was so small. I think I could, if I have a 10-year-old grandson, I think if he was in a crazy rage and maybe on drugs and stuff, I, a six iron is a brutal instrument. And if you hit repeatedly, I believe definitely that he could have done that at that size. And you know how he could have done it as well? I believe he was blacked out, which is
Well,
why he doesn't know either.
I think that there's a lot of what I think that the failure, and one of the reasons that Michael is free now, and one of the reasons that they said that he was denied effective counsel, was the fact that jurors never heard about what happened between Martha and Tommy Skakel that night. Jurors heard nothing about Tommy Skakel. All they heard about was Ken Littleton. The theory, and I don't know if there's anything to it. Do you know how Mickey got his job?
I don't know. I don't know why they hired him. Honestly, to me, they
At
thought
the
they were
recommendation of Manny,
A Hollywood lawyer.
at the recommendation of Manny Margolis, Tommy's lawyer, and many of the early meetings were actually held at Manny Margolis's office. And Linda Kenny Bodden, who was initially on the defense team, said she couldn't understand how they could be holding meetings at the offices of the primary defender of decades of Tommy Skakel.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe Manny would be that cynical, but I do agree. We got to go right to the last segment, so hold on. We're back, our final segment. We've gone through a lot tonight. And I believe, by the way, psychologically, the Sutton, report builds a case that both of them could have done it, and somehow Rush inadvertently helped implicate them. But if you know Tommy and you know Michael, I know Tommy, you get a sense that Tommy knew he was loved and Michael did not, and they have fundamentally different psychological frameworks. I want to say one other thing about the backcountry story. I read this in his book, that was sort of stolen from them, and it made no sense to me. This is the biggest, most impactful night of Michael's life, and in the book, he describes coming back in the car with unbelievable, minute details. I went right to Google to say, is that a sign that he's lying or of guilt? Because it made no sense on the biggest night of his life that he somehow remembers these incredible little things. You probably read it too. And the masturbation thing, it looks choreographed. The ways I sent something over here, I stepped at a light, maybe somebody saw. It almost looks choreographed. Other than, let me give you a shot now to go.
Well, that was Furman's theory too. I think, look, memory is a tricky thing. My
Yeah,
experience with Michael, I've dealt with liars before, as you have, I think, as well. And what's interesting about people who lie versus people who tell the truth is that the people who are telling the truth consistently tell the same story.
yeah.
Liars, it tends to change. And if you look at the Sutton report, and I'm not trying to implicate Tommy here, but his stories changed even when he was talking about the night of the murder, you know, how he and Martha actually hooked up after, how that all went down. That's the thing. And my producer at NBC News was saying, we listened to hours and hours of Michael's tapes. They are consistently the same story. And I don't know if you put any stock in this, but Michael has been sober for a very, very long time, long before he was tried for this murder. And the reason that he reunited with the Kennedy family was because he was the one who was welcoming many of his Kennedy cousins into recovery. And
Let me say, he's done a lot of good works that he should get credit since he got sober.
One of the things is that they say in AA, I'm not in AA, but you're as sick as your secrets. And basically one of the tenets is if you are hiding something, you will drink that you have to basically unload and say everything. And if you know anything about Michael, you know how he frequently says far too much. And it's probably the reason he got into this situation that he's in, is because he told this story over and over. But I've spent so much time with Michael, and there have been so many times where I feel like this is too much information. I didn't need to know that. I don't think, and if you knew, do you know Michael personally?
No, I do not. Not at all.
If you spend any time, any extended period of time with Michael, you know that this person is incapable of withholding things. I just don't think he's a liar. I believe him. Maybe you might think I'm naive, but I've spent dozens of hours with him. I just don't believe he is lying about not killing Martha Moxley. I don't believe he is lying about going to Sursum Corda. And if he was at Sursum Corda, I think it's case closed. If he was at Sursum Corda at 10 p.m. watching Monty Python's Flying Circus, he was not Martha Moxley's murderer.
I agree with that.
The Greenwich police again said it has been established that Michael was there for years.
And I do believe that if he was there, it was not done at 11 o'clock. I just will never be convinced by the logic. And the killing is a rage killing. Someone had to have a rage killing with a Skakel golf club, brutal. And to me, that leaves only two people. The rest of this is just uh, hocus pocus, you know. So once you narrow it to that, you have to ask yourself, well, who's the more likely guy? But, I'm the same way. You're saying, Michael got sober, he tells the truth. We know that isn't good enough for the case, just like it isn't good enough for me to assume because he was a jealous teen high, that he didn't go to the backcountry. I just find it illogical. And I also think I don't believe Michael knows really if he did it or not, because that kind of rage at that kind of age on those kinds of drugs.
What drugs?
I mean, he was on, he was drinking heavily. I don't know if he was on drugs. I learned
He
more
wasn't
about
on.
drugs.
They were
But
smoking pot. They were
he had had
smoking
a lot
pot
of,
that night and drinking.
he'd had a lot of alcohol
Yeah.
from the club beforehand, and you're right. The drugs I've only learned more recently of other stuff they've accused him of being on. But he was a raging alcoholic at 12 years old, which is
He was.
yeah, which is mind-boggling. I believe I think it's if he killed her, he didn't really know he killed her because he was blacked out. That still means he killed her. Again, I can't prove that. I would never claim that in a court of law or anything. I just don't see anybody else that could have done that murder. That's
Well, I think the jurors, and I think that this speaks to, Mickey said, "Oh, I couldn't have used any of the stuff from Sutton." He could have asked Helen Ix, which I don't believe he did on the stand, about Martha's curfew and about Martha saying, "I'm right behind you." Helen is, I talked to Helen the other day. Helen is convinced Michael went. I mean, this was sleight of hand by the prosecution to suggest that Michael didn't go. I don't believe that they actually believed that Michael stayed. I think that they knew she died at 10 p.m. and they had to come up with a reason. They had to come up with some theory that Michael was there. I don't
and
buy it.
I think, and I know you can't. I know I can't run with it because she changed her story. But Julie originally saw somebody run out of the bushes, which to me is perfect timing for he saw his brother do this. And I people will say Tommy's even well if he saw this, why didn't he come after me instead of Martha? And the answer is, first of all, Tommy was a lot bigger than him. But if he'd had a golf club, that would have, and if he was blacked out. But in his mind, it was Martha that was betraying him, not Tommy.
Well, if you look in the diaries, there were a lot of boys that had heavy crushes on Michael. There's no
Yeah.
disputing that Michael had a crush on Martha. But so, if that is the motive of jealousy of somebody messing around with Martha, half of the boys in Greenwich could have done it.
Well,
Michael,
you have to have
there's
the
no
rage.
there's no
No,
sign.
you need the rage that Michael was carrying around with him. And I don't know if you feel this, but my feeling, this whole thing emanated out of Ann Skakel's death.
Yeah.
18 months later, the family collapsed. Rush collapsed. Nobody told Michael what was going on. He didn't feel he was loved. And you go on and on and on and on. And it's a culmination of a very, very tragic confluence of events.
Michael was a mess. Look, there's no doubt, and Michael admits as much. Michael did not fall out of a limousine when he was three years old and have anger issues that were so.
That's a good point. I agree too on that.
Tommy fell out of a limousine at 3 and basically had the symptoms. I think you would, when you see sometimes NFL players killing their partners, they attribute it after to CTE, and I think Tommy had something similar to CTE. His sister Julie told me he was never the same after he fell out of that car. They had to have people come and restrain him in the neighborhood because he would get so angry.
Yeah.
I've heard
I
stories
understand, and if you and I are in the same, that it's one or the other. And the thing is, you know, Michael, the way you described him, I know Tommy, the sweetness of his disposition, the ability to have survived 25 years as a suspect for something he didn't do, if he didn't do it, it's hard to conceive of again. But both Michael and Tommy, we didn't know back then. And I think they were both really troubled. I just think one was in a different way than the other. But anyway,
one was at the crime, but one was at the crime scene and one was not.
I'll give you the last word on that. I want to thank Andrew again for doing a tremendous job. We're going to stick around after the radio version of this over and talk this through because there's a lot of stuff there, and I want to make sure Andrew feels he was fairly treated. Dead Cert, Martha Moxley Murder, and Jim Campbell Radio. Check out our YouTube channel. We're on Apple Podcasts, radio stations. Please check out my book, Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history from McGraw-Hill. Netflix, The Madoff, The Monster, Wall Street from Joe Berlinger. Thanks again to Andrew.
Thank you so much.
What is your theory of the case?
You know, when I talked to these 4 FBI profilers, they thought about it the same way that I did, which is so much evidence, so many mistakes were made by the Greenwich police in the first days of the investigation.
Yes.
That for me to get on a podcast and do what many people did to Michael Skakel and what some people did to Hasbrook and Tinsley is unfair. For me to say, I know who killed Martha Moxley. I don't know who killed.
You handled that with a great deal of integrity in the podcast.
I don't know who killed Martha Moxley, and I think the case was so botched. They spent the first few, the first 48 hours looking at a guy named Ed Hammond in the neighborhood and not looking at anybody else. And I think that any evidence that was there was probably disposed of. So I think of it as putting suspects in tiers, like the most likely to the least likely. And I put Michael actually fairly close to the bottom. I don't put him at the very bottom, but I believe that Tommy has to remain a better suspect than Michael.
When you say bottom, you mean after all the other guys, the tutor, the case?
No, not after.
You mean between Tommy and him?
Yeah, and perhaps even lower than Ken Littleton, who was at the house at the time. Ken Littleton behaved in really appalling ways in the years following the case, which included sexual violence towards women. And, it's funny, in Furman's book, Furman dismisses him because he says there's no evidence that, just because Ken Littleton, the summer after the murder, broke into a couple of places in Nantucket, that there's no reason to think that he had any kind of there was no violence towards women in his background. And what Mark Furman, which is remarkable to me, failed to understand was the FOIA documents that he got had all of the parts about Ken Littleton being violent towards women because he was the prime suspect when Mark Furman got those documents had been redacted. So he saw nothing about what Ken Littleton did after. And so he dismissed him.
Something about that. The thing is, I don't know for a fact, but my guess is that before the Moxley murder, Ken Littleton did not have any history of this kind of stuff. He looked like a wholesome, preppy kind of guy, and his life was obviously destroyed. And remember, he arrives that afternoon. He doesn't know Martha Moxley, and he supposedly rage killed her in a small window. He and Tommy are actually each other's alibis. Bobby Kennedy conflates this in my mind. He has Littleton as a potential serial killer, crazy, breaking into homes, all of which is true, became bipolar after the murder. And then at the same time, Michael is sober. He's done all these good works. He's a great guy, all of which is true. But at the murder time, Michael was crazed, out of control, a rageaholic type of guy, and this guy Littleton may have been a good, So I think he's conflated them around at subsequent years. Do you have any evidence that Littleton did stuff before this murder?
No, but I think what's very interesting is that when he sat down at the behest of the Greenwich police, when Frank Garr and his boss it was Jim Solomon, is that Jim Solomon? When they were very, very aggressively pursuing Ken Littleton, that they had him sit down for 2 days with a psychiatrist that they brought in from Denver. And I thought it was interesting. I thought the theory about Ken Littleton is that being being there that night drove him crazy and drove him to do all these things in his future. That basically this was the thing that drove him to his mental illness. And Ken said to Kathy Morale, he said, "I think all of this would have happened regardless. I think this is who I am. I don't think that this murder had anything to do with how my life went. It would have gone this way regardless." Um, so
Either way, that doesn't have anything. That night is just it's just so illogical. It just doesn't make any sense. And you've got a golf club and two kids that are screwed up. One of whom's in the bushes with her. One of whom may have
a golf club that came from the Skakel house, which Ken Littleton was staying at that night. I mean, the only theory, I feel confident in the theory. I guess we have to believe Tommy when he said something sexual happened. Whether it was consensual or not, I do not know.
Yes.
The only theory that makes any sense is that somebody witnessed this act between Tommy and Martha and was so enraged by it that after Martha left Tommy,
Right. Now, who could that be?
Intercepted her.
Who could that be that would be enraged?
Well, it could be.
Ooh,
It
Michael's
could be.
right
I mean,
on.
we know that Belhaven. Look, that it was a gated community, but we do know that it was fairly porous. I mean, the issue is whether you believe that the club actually came from inside the house. There were a lot of Greenwich teens who said to me that it was illogical what the gardener said, which was that there was no sporting equipment on the ground. You could believe that one of Bobby's theories was that it was a weapon of opportunity, that everybody had been swinging those clubs. Those clubs were that the Skakel house was in disarray, that the property was
Yeah.
covered in clubs. Somebody could have picked up a club while watching Tommy and then gone and approached Martha. So I think it's less logical than the
Having
club
sex
coming.
with Tommy?
What?
For having sex with Tommy?
Yes.
Why? Aside from
What
Michael, why would they? Why?
what if it was her boyfriend?
Little Peter Zaluka,
Yeah.
who has an alibi in your thing, as far as I'm concerned, right?
He has an alibi, which I mean, the FBI profilers went over it with me, and they said that this alibi is illogical. The alibi, he's alibied from 5 p.m. and his mother sees him in that day at home from 5 p.m. She spends time with him until 2 a.m. And they said, "We don't believe the alibi. We have no reason to believe. Nobody saw him in Belhaven, but the alibi that he produced is far too good." And it
But
was
that night is mission that he wouldn't have then hung out with them. He came and he spied on them.
uh well, in Greentown in the book, he said that the reason he was supposed to have dinner with Martha that night. He told police that everything was peachy between he and Martha. Martha, in her diary, which I
Yeah.
show in the podcast, that Peter made an effort actually to steal and may have read, goes through many, many assignations that she has with many, many different boys before Peter, and the boys who have a crush on her after Peter, and the fact that she's about to dump Peter. They were supposed to have dinner that night. I've never heard a good explanation as to why that dinner got canceled. He said, "I got too stoned and I went home." It was mischief night. He didn't have school the following day at Greenwich High. So he goes home and takes a nap at 4, wakes up at 6 p.m., has dinner with his mother, watches on the couch, watches on the sofa, the French Connection with his mother, watches the late local news with his mother. His mother sees him in the kitchen when she gets a call at 1:30 in the morning from a sister who's at college. Peter and his mother are out in front of the house watching somebody get picked up in front of the house at 2 a.m. It is just, you've had teenagers, correct?
Sorry?
You have teenagers, right?
No, I have four girls that are 44, twins
Well,
41.
but you've had teenage. Well, maybe what I know having teenage boys
Well, I
is
have had teenagers, yeah.
the idea that they would spend an uninterrupted 8 hour period of time next to either me or my wife, and we have a perfectly good relationship with our kids, is illogical. I don't think his alibi was correct. I don't think his alibi was real. And in Greentown, Peter Zaluka says, my mother said at the end of the night, at some point said, I know you want to go see Martha. Take the car over to Belhaven and see Martha. And Peter, and this is years later, and who knows, he said that he heard scratching on the windows and said, for the first time in my life, I was scared. And so I was too scared to go to Belhaven. And I just heard that and I just thought, that is not true. This was a strapping kid. And this is a kid who, in Martha's diary, showed a lot of jealousy, showed a lot of rage, and had a record of violence against women after.
Yeah. Well,
So I don't.
I don't put much credence into any of that. But what I do put credence in, what you just did just then, to me, is enough to create reasonable doubt to get Michael off. So how Mickey could have blown that. And part of it is I wonder why didn't he? All he had to do was put Tommy as someone that could have done it. You got automatic reasonable doubt. He chose not to do that. Did he try not to offend the Skakels? Did he feel like if he got one off and got another one convicted, that would be bad?
Well, look, both Linda Kenny Bodden and the head of the Sutton, head of Sutton, Jim Murphy, they both had the same theory independently. They don't know each other, and they said it just makes logical sense that if Manny Margolis, Tommy's lawyer, gets you hired for a case, there is either an explicit or a tacit agreement that you're not going to bring my guy into the
Okay,
case.
yeah, that makes sense to me too, by the way. But it cost Michael the case
It
because
cost Michael the
Tommy
case.
is the reasonable doubt.
Tommy is absolutely the reasonable
Right.
doubt.
The cavemen, the tutor who'd been there 3 hours, Zaluka,
Well, I mean, Mickey, and the issue with the case against Ken Littleton, and the reason um, that Jack Solomon was so convinced that Ken Littleton did it was he blew a number of polygraph tests, like really blew them to the point where, one of the guys they brought in was I think the head of polygraphs for the army and said the guy in the other room killed Martha Moxley. I'm sure of it. I've never seen a worse polygraph. So they believed that they had. This was the evidence that they had, and this was the reason that they tried to get a confession from Ken, because they knew that polygraphs are inadmissible, and nobody heard anything about those polygraphs. So the idea that the sum total of the evidence against Ken Littleton was really these polygraphs, which he knew he couldn't use. And Mickey, I heard him talk about the fact that he couldn't use any of the Sutton stuff. I just think that there was a mound of things that he could have done to show that Tommy was the last person with Martha alive. It was in the New York Times the following day that the last person to be seen alive with Martha was Thomas Skakel.
and he walked around for 25 years knowing he was the suspect.
Yeah.
And but in a sense, interesting. Tommy and Littleton are each other's alibis too, because he saw Tommy no dress change, no demeanor, and Tommy saw the tutor in the room together in Rush's room watching the friend. So in a
Yeah,
sense,
this was around 10:20. I mean, basically, that's something that you have to grapple with. I mean, there are people, Jim Murphy thinks that that the attack was two-pronged, that there was some sort of altercation. Jim Murphy, the Sutton report was used. Dominic Dunn said in Vanity Fair that the Sutton report was presented to Rushton Skakel, saying that in all likelihood Michael Skakel was the killer. And I talked to Jim Murphy, and Jim Murphy firmly believes that Tommy's the killer. The idea that they would say that Sutton associates believe that Michael is the killer is just not true.
oh, I've read it too, and it lays out. You go in thinking they're going to come up with some way to exonerate them, and you're blown away that they both have psychological profiles that could have done it, but they don't go make that claim. I'll tell you where I have a problem on Michael's size is moving the body 80 feet or whatever to that tree. That one I grapple with, and I'm going to throw a name out at you, and you tell me what you think of this guy, Jimmy Terrian.
Jimmy Terrian's sort of a mystery to me. I mean,
Yeah.
Jimmy Terrian was supposedly
He was
when he
missing
was
that night too. Now I don't mean him as a killer, but I mean as maybe helping clean up.
Jimmy Terrian is, he's obviously dead. I think that Mrs. X reported that she at some point said, approached Tommy in his bedroom and said, "Tommy, you just got to tell us what happened." And Tommy was silent for a minute and said, "Ask Jimmy Terrian." I don't know what that means. You may have spoken to Tommy about it. I don't know what that means. I don't know if we can put anything in it. He had a very strange alibi for where he was when Mrs. Moxley called over to
Yes,
Sursum Corder that night, which was that he was sleeping with a
yes.
local 40-year-old married woman. Um, I don't know. He remains a mystery, and if I do, or if I did a part two, I think that I would try to figure out a little more about Jimmy Terrian because it is a mystery.
I have talked to Tommy about not that, about the that car accidents, the Jeep Wagoneer, as you described it. That was Tommy's brand new car, and he tells it in a way that only Tommy could, which is with love and sympathy and sweetness. But
Oh, he told me that story before, and it was not with love and sweetness. He was holding on decades after it. The fact that his brother had a drunk
no,
driving accident with his brand new
he
Jeep.
has never forgotten it. But one thing that sticks in his mind is um, that Michael showed no remorse that he had just totaled his car.
Mhm. Again, Michael was a kid with a lot of problems, but again, Michael, and this is what I always come back to, is Michael was 8 miles away at the time of the murder, and nobody's going to move me from that.
Yeah. And I'm
Um,
moved from the that he never went. So yeah, and neither of us can prove it. I mean, or 100%. Um, yours is more
Well,
more.
I think that no, I think that when Len Levitt, who covered the case, talked about, and I think he actually expressed some doubt. I mean, I played some of the first interview from 1991 from Andrea Shakespeare, and it's clear Andrea Shakespeare doesn't know who's at the house. I mean, she is basically inside the house. She has no view of the car, no view of who goes. And in 1991, she says, "I don't know who was there. I had this gut."
Was there a time when she said, because I may have misremembered this, that she said, "I know he didn't go. I'm never going to change that." And then, of course, she changed it, just like Sissy Hicks, who said,
She said it
"Well,
on the stand. It was on the stand, and I
right."
don't
But
think
did
that.
she at one point say that? Because that's what
Not according to
Sissy
any
Hicks
police
changed the
not
story
according to
too, as
any
you know.
police report I ever saw. Not according to any police report I ever
Okay,
saw.
well, Sissy Hicks changed her story too. Rush came to me, said that Michael thinks he may have done it, blah, 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 blah. And then I
And
think she,
Michael told me the story of when he thought that he had done it after he got out of Elan. And I think that he had been subjected to torture, and he said that you could have told me at that point that I was, the Hamburglar, and I would have believed it. And
yeah,
he wanted to have psychological tests, and he went through them. And it was actually the same psychiatrist that worked on Tommy around the time of the crime. Rush was a staunch Catholic, and I don't think that we can underestimate how upset Rush was with this incident in which Michael was caught. Michael says that he was sleeping with his mother's nightgown.
yeah.
Uh, I think that it was reported to Rush by the maid that he was in a nightgown. I think Rush thought that he had a cross-dressing kid in his house. I don't think Michael was a cross-dresser, but I think that this was as offensive as Michael bringing home Playboy magazines would be. Can you imagine what it would have done to staunch Catholic Rush?
It totally corroborates from what I've heard from Tommy's perspective on that, which I was first cynical on because of the DNA issue.
So what's Tommy's view on this?
The Rush had this religious fanaticism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think that that's disputed. To me, what's sort of amazing is, and I really wish, I had corresponded with Len Levitt, and he seemed like a very good guy. And I just don't know how Len Levitt could have gone from writing this book with Frank Garr, who was the primary investigator, the sole investigator
Yeah.
of the Moxley case, and it was called Conviction: Solving the Moxley Murder. And it says that in the book it says. This incredible memoir reveals how a police officer and a reporter refused to give up and how they helped justice to prevail against all odds. And I think for a certain period of time, Len Levitt, when he wrote this book in I guess it was 2004 or so, was convinced that Michael was guilty. And then he comes on your show and said that I have 100% certainty that it was either Michael or Tommy or Jimmy Terrian or a combination of the three. I don't know what sort of evolution that Len Levitt had to go from writing a book that said
That was
that
the
Michael
feeling
was.
I had. I don't even remember the interview as well as you do, but the feeling I got was that because you know where I'm thinking that Michael is more likely than not, but that's not a reasonable doubt. Len was never really expressing between the two of them.
In
Uh,
his book, he was. He certainly was. Why would you call it solving the
oh,
Moxley murder?
when I dealt with him, and you're right, I read the book too. Yeah, I,
Well, what I found interesting, and you might find this interesting, I can send you a copy of this, was something that I found that I don't think that the lawyers quite understood that they were looking at. You know, that there was in the appeals, there were some claims that there had been a book deal between Frank Garr, the investigator of the case, and Len Levitt before trial,
right.
and the appellate attorneys were trying to make a case that there was some financial incentive to convict Michael Skakel. But I found this document, and it's just crazy to me because, the grand jury was convened in June of 1998. And the grand jury, which was a one-man grand jury, they call it an investigative grand jury, could have looked at anyone. They could have looked at both Michael and Tommy. They only brought in witnesses to talk about Michael. And this was in June of 1998. Frank Garr was very, very adamant that he had always thought that he was convinced that Michael was the guy. But I found this draft of an article that Len Levitt had written, and based on the details in the article, and I can send this to you and you see if you want to corroborate it. It had to have been written in November of 96 or early 1997. So it was 18 months or fewer before the grand jury was called. And in this draft that Len Levitt has written, which he's obviously shared with Frank Garr, which as a journalist, it raised my eyebrows because I
Hmm.
don't think he usually shared drafts of stories. This was after Tommy had changed his story.
Hmm.
And various people had gone to Don Brown and said, look, Tommy changed his story, said there was sexual contact. We need to get a grand jury convened for Tommy. So here is this draft story that came 18 months after the grand jury. And here's a line in it. The prime suspect is Ethel Kennedy's nephew, Thomas Skakel. Quote, I am 99.5% convinced Thomas Skakel did this, said an investigator familiar with the case. I believe his life has amounted to nothing because of it, and that it is also true of the Skakel kids who may have knowledge of the murder. And then under that's a note which says, Frank, do you want to be quoted on this? I think it would be stronger than an unnamed investigator. So we have the primary investigator 18 months before Michael Skakel and Michael Skakel alone was looked at by an investigative grand jury saying, I'm 99.5% certain that Tommy, a different guy, did it. How can we explain the whiplash?
How do you was Furman then the first guy that put Michael in it?
Yeah, well, that happened in the intervening time, and I think that the pressure that was put on. I mean, Don Brown was he says he quit. I think he was pushed aside so that they could get a Fairfield state's attorney who would bring the case. And John Benedict, who came in, who had no knowledge of the case, a month after I think he was put into the position, called the grand jury, something that Don Brown was unwilling to do.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. I'll tell you what, the GPD hated Furman. They wanted no
Yeah.
from. They
Well, I
threw
mean,
him out of
what's
Greenwich.
so funny about Furman and having interviewed Furman, and it shows Furman's blind spots, was that he went to Greenwich and nobody would cooperate with him.
Right.
The only thing he had for his book was the Sutton report. Nobody would cooperate. The cops wouldn't cooperate with him.
Yeah.
Bellhaven residents wouldn't cooperate, and he attributes it in the book to Greenwich not wanting to solve this case, and
Yeah.
fails to grapple with the idea that he was the number one villain in America at that time.
Yeah.
And he was
No.
also a person noted for screwing up probably the most open and shut case in the 20th century. He blew his the fact that he perjured himself on the stand, I think, allowed O.J. Simpson to walk. He
Yeah.
became a sideshow, but he also, I think, was one of the major reasons that O.J.
But he
Simpson walked.
didn't plant the glove because he could not have planted the glove. Physically impossible. He came on the case. The glove obviously was already there because OJ brought it. But yeah, the racism, sunk.
Well, I mean, Furman's theory was that that there was a vast conspiracy quarterbacked by Rushton Skakel, which really showed that he had no idea who he was dealing with because Rushton
I
was
don't buy that at all.
well,
Yeah,
people bought the
you
reason. I think that without the Furman book, I don't believe that grand jury would have been convened. He put a lot of pressure, both he and Dominic Dunn put a lot of pressure on the media. Mark Furman said, I think he said specifically, Connecticut, I've given you all you need. What are you waiting for? Do you want to solve this case or not?
Let me
There's a
ask you
great
this.
deal of,
Why do you think Tommy Sheridan quarterbacked that, the report and everything? This wouldn't have
why?
happened without the Sudden report either.
What's funny is I talked to Jim Murphy of Sutton, and the quote, the if you go through, and I had an opportunity to look at the legal files, many of which were written by Tom Sheridan, who was, he's not only Rushton Skakel's attorney, but he was also the bursar. He was the one that controlled all the money. Rushton referred to Tom Sheridan as his brain. He dealt with a lot. He dealt with disciplining the kids in certain ways. He had a lot of jobs, and as far as I know, Tom Sheridan had one client, and it was Rushton Skakel, one very rich man. It's what's very interesting is if you go through the reports, the legal memos, there are long, long, long memos from Tom Sheridan, thousands of words long, speculating who could have killed them. And the number that Dominic Dunn put on, he said I had heard that the Sutton investigation cost $750,000. Stephen Skakel said that he heard the Sutton investigation cost $1.2 million. And, when I was interviewing Jim Murphy, who's the head of Sutton, I mentioned these numbers to him and he said, what do you, I didn't see any of that. He said, I probably got paid $60,000 for the entire thing. I think there was a lot of billable hours in doing these long reports. And I think that it was kind of make work for Tom Sheridan. Tom Sheridan, who actually inserted into the Sutton reports a lot of inaccuracies about Michael. I think Rushton Skakel had a real issue with Tom Sheridan, which I think Tom Sheridan intuited, and I think Tom Sheridan kind of reflected his animus, that kind of animus, to the Sutton investigators about Michael. Tom Sheridan included a fact that said that Michael and Martha had been boyfriend and girlfriend before, and this is something that Furman included in his book, and there's no evidence. I mean, going through Martha's diaries, Michael was never involved with Martha in any kind of romantic way. He had a crush on her, but as I said, every other teen in Bellhaven did as well.
Yeah, no.
So I think that the when I went through it, and this is some of the stuff that we included and framed, I really saw Tom Sheridan's fingerprints on a lot of stuff, and I think that he took a lot of money out of that family. And one of the reasons that the family is now destitute were was because of some of the financial decisions and the money taken out of that family by Tom Sheridan, the attorney, who, again, as Julie Skakel told me, Rushton Skakel was a really, really serious alcoholic, which escalated after his wife died in
Yes.
1973. And they would say that periodically Rush would get sent off to rehab to dry out, and inevitably they would come home and they would see Rush and Tom Sheridan in the living room drinking scotches together. And they felt like this was something that somebody who had his best interests at heart would not be doing, was basically encouraging him to drink again.
That's terrible, actually.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. He's not a suspect at this time, and so the thoughts are, well, they shipped him off to Elon to get him out of town. Why did they send him to Elon?
It was deferred, it was a Tom Sheridan thing. And basically it was very simply, he had a horrific drunk driving accident around the Wyndham ski house.
Hmm.
They went to a judge, and as with many kids, they said either you're going to get convicted of this crime and you're going to be severely punished, or you could do this diversionary program, which is we'll send you out to the country and you can get sober. And that was the way that it was sold to Michael, and that was the way it was sold to other people I talked to at Elan, which is, hey, go to Elan. They have horses there. You're going to be out in the wilderness. It's going to be great, blah, blah, blah. And then they send them to basically a concentration camp. And
Yeah.
I really do think that Tom Sheridan and perhaps even Rushton Skakel, there was some sadistic element. I think that they probably understood what Elan was. There was a term that people used to use, which is tough love. And I think that at a certain period of time, if people had kids who were screwed up,
Hmm.
it was really appealing to have somebody say, we've had incredible results, and there's psychological backing suggesting that if we abuse your kids, we will get them well. And I think that Rush was so angry, and I think it was probably not unrelated to this cross-dressing thing, probably not unrelated to his son coming and saying that he wanted to look more closely into the murder. I think he wanted to get rid of him. There was no, the idea, as Furman put, that they were hiding him away, that they were, is insane because in the police reports, they have actually reports of Michael Skakel is now at the Elan School in Maine. They knew where he was. This was no mystery. He was not being hidden. He
Why do
was
you
he.
think Tommy and Michael are estranged?
Well, look. Michael said to me, one of the things that Julie said to me was that Tommy had a real issue, and this happened. Julie said to me after he fell out of the limousine when he was 3 or 4,
Yeah.
that he had real issues with the truth, telling the truth. That Julie told me, and this was something that Michael repeated to me, was that they would go to school and they would say, "Oh, we heard you have a NASCAR track behind your house." And they were like, "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, Tommy said that you actually have a NASCAR track behind your house." And the way Michael has explained it to me is, I just can't have anybody in my life that can't tell the truth. This is the way he's described Tommy to me. And then it's funny, years after, both of them have talked about to me these issues that they had major issues about. One of them was the Jeep, which was in 1978, and Tommy's still talking about this Jeep 30 years later. He's still talking about the Jeep, that Michael totaled his Jeep. And he also talks about the fact that they had this huge fight over ski wax at the ski house. Michael, I think, took his ski wax without asking him, and they had this incredibly violent interaction. Decades later, Tommy's talking about the ski wax. It's a strange family. But I think most of them, I don't think that I think most of them, I know Steven's estranged from Tommy. When I talked to Julie, she didn't talk to Tommy. I don't know if any of the siblings talked to Tommy.
Some of them did. It is that there's definitely a schism. Julie's a very tragic case, by the way. You
Julie's
know,
a horrible case. Yeah.
yeah,
Julie died of she had long-term opioid problems, but she
yeah.
died
Vero Beach.
a, a couple of years within, her daughter died of an opioid overdose in her early 30s, and Julie followed her probably 18 months later.
And
Uh,
it's really sad because she was like a backbone of that family at that age, taking, care of people without it. And her life you know, just collapsed. The whole thing. Did you have a most surprising revelation?
Let me think about that. Most surprising revelation. That is a hard one. I was really there were certain questions that I thought were going to be hard to ask, and there were certain things that I was wrestling with.
Mhm.
One of them was the fact, the Sissy X report saying that Michael had gone to Russian and said, "I have some doubts about that evening,"
Yeah.
and this was something that was hard to approach. And I found Michael. He didn't hesitate. He was very forthright about, my head was scrambled. I was literally brainwashed at Elan. They told me day after day to admit to this crime, and
Well,
I
that was
came
very
back.
interesting. Very interesting, I thought, because Sissy lied on the under oath, I think. So he certainly could have taken that, it didn't happen. Do you have a take on what happened to the missing golf club handle?
Um, no, I think it was either in the Long Island Sound, or it was gotten rid of in the days following the crime.
Who do you think who would have had the motive to do that? To
Well,
get
look,
what?
I mean, there's two ways to think about it. I think that if you're going with Occam's razor, if you're going, the simplest explanation is the best one. Look, it was dark when Martha was killed. The golf club, she was hit with such force that the golf club shattered into four pieces.
Right.
The ground was leaf covered, so three pieces were recovered. And if you look at the crime scene, you can barely see the golf club. And this is in the light. You can barely see the golf club amongst the leaves. Martha, a wound was delivered to Martha's neck, and and uh,
Yeah.
and the most reasonable explanation was the wound. There was a puncture wound from one side of her neck, and it came out the other. Somebody
Hair,
stabbed.
hair coming out the other end. Really unbelievable.
Yeah, really unbelievable. And I think it makes sense that that was probably delivered by the handle. So look, the handle was a leatherette handle that had Mrs. Skakel's name on it. So you can think of it one of two ways. Either the killer only had access to the handle and took it away because had his fingerprints on it, or wanted to hide the club because it had the Skakel name on it. I think it's more likely, the latter is more likely. And I think that there was this one thing that we talked about before, and it was Jim Murphy from Sutton's theory. We talk about the alibi that Tommy had with Ken Littleton. At about 10:20, he went up to the second floor of the Skakel house and sat down and watched about 20 minutes of the French Connection with Ken Littleton, who was staying in Rush Skakel's room. And Ken Littleton reported, and I take all of this with a grain of salt because everybody had been drinking that night, including at the Bellhaven Club. And honestly, I think that Littleton was already a drinker then. I find it hard to believe that Littleton also didn't pour himself a drink when he got back to the Skakel house. It was all unmonitored liquor.
Nor
So
should he be, nor should he been letting the younger kids drink at Bellhaven too. I put that.
exactly, but Littleton reported that Tommy looked unmussed, that he appeared to be wearing the same clothes that he was wearing at Bellhaven.
Right.
Jim Murphy's theory was, and what's interesting is that, and this was something that was a small revelation, was that at some point I saw in the interviews that Tommy said at one point, and then I went upstairs to my room to watch more TV. So Tommy said that he had a TV in his room. Tommy didn't know why. It seems interesting to me that he went in and hung out with the tutor for 20 minutes. I don't know. He could have watched the movie in his room. Um, I just Jim Murphy's theory, and I think it's interesting, is that he believes that Tommy attacked Martha with the golf club, and hit her a number of times, and went and possibly just freaking out and trying to get some sort of alibi, put himself in that room, which is a lot of thinking for a 17-year-old. And it
Mhm.
was only after excusing himself from Rush Skakel's room and saying, I'm going up back to bed, slipped out of the house, and then moved the body from the initial tax site to under the tree, and then performed the coup de grace in her neck. And it showed that because she didn't aspirate any blood, she was either very close to dying or dead. But
Mhm.
whoever put that golf club through her neck wanted to make sure that she was not going to be reporting who either her attempted sexual assaulter, her attempted rapist, or the person that punched her in the face was. And so that was Jim Murphy's, because it would have been, you sort of think of it, and it would have been, you imagine, kind of a messy crime scene. The FBI agents that I talked to said you'd be really surprised at how even people who have performed very violent murders, they may have like a fleck of blood here and there, but they're not obviously covered in blood. They said with a implement that long, uh, as a golf club, it could have been done so that this person would not have been looked like, it would not have been covered in blood. So I thought it was interesting, the idea that Jim Murphy had, and actually Jessica Walker, who's one of Michael's appellate attorneys, I think she shared it, which was that there was, Jim Murphy said, so a killer, let's imagine it's Tommy, goes and sits and is sitting there freaking out, keeping his composure somehow, and thinking to himself, is she dead? Is she dead? Is she dead? Slips out and then has to make sure that she's dead. And at that point, delivers the coup de grace.
And you think that he could have moved the body, unlike Michael being too small? to
Well, I mean,
move.
you look at the pictures. I mean, the pictures of Tommy and Michael from that time. Tommy's bigger.
Yeah,
I mean,
Tommy's definitely he's definitely big.
neither neither of them are as big as Ken Littleton, but Tommy is considerably bigger.
Yeah,
Tommy, I think if you look at the Michael, if you look at the pictures, uh, probably weighed, I want to say he probably had a 26, 28-inch waist. He looked to be about compared, I have some photos of him with his classmates.
yeah,
He's shorter. He looks to be about 5'6",
yeah.
5'7" tops. And I've never moved a body, but basically what people have told me is that it's very dead weight is very, very difficult. I talked to Helen Nix, and she said that when she was talking to police in the 90s, they thought the crime was they thought that they looked at the crime and thought that it would have had to involve two people because of the strength and the moving of the body.
That's where we bring Jimmy Terrian in.
Yeah. Well, yes. Jimmy Terrian is still a great mystery to me. But yeah, I don't think, and I honestly, I remember showing my wife this photo of Michael when he was 15 that Mickey Sherman failed to track down. Mickey Sherman showed, got one witness to say this is what Michael looked like in 1975, and the photo was taken in 1979, and he'd had a significant growth spurt. I have one of the photos here I can show you.
I know he was small. I just don't think. I just think a golf club is so brutal, and if you're out of control, so I think he could have done that. I don't know, but the moving the body does, raise, to give more reasonable doubt. Put it that way.
Well, I honestly, it's almost beyond reasonable doubt to me. It should have been a home run for Mickey, and I still to this day can't figure out what his motivation was. I talked to Vito Colucci, his primary investigator
Yep.
in the case, and Vito
All
did
that.
Vito. I mean, what I thought was very interesting, and I think that you've called it a lynching before, and I have a lot of issues with Bobby Kennedy, not most of them not related to the book. I mean, just politically, and I have
Yep.
no issues with him personally, but I have a lot of issues with him politically. But it was viewed as this racist attack, and I talked to the source of this story was Tony Bryant, who was a black man who came to tell Bobby Kennedy the story,
He
and I
heard.
feel like the most compelling thing that I heard about the New York guys was from Chris Steele, who went to Bridgeport and interviewed Al Hasbrook with Vito Colucci, and both Chris Steele and Vito Colucci said Al Hasbrook at that meeting, which was not recorded, said I was in Bellhaven that night. That
Yeah,
is,
I don't know. It doesn't make, I heard in your podcast too that Brian said, I had to be home and get the last train at 9, which gets him conveniently out of there. And for some reason, he left the two other guys there. But, the last train is at 11:30 at midnight anyway. So that was just, and then all these I don't know why. I don't know why he put himself in the case. I don't understand that. And obviously, you uncovered all the lies he told before, from law school to going to prison, and there's just no credibility. Another
I
thing,
think everybody, I think, as is my theory about Michael putting himself in the tree, I think everybody who was at all either directly or peripherally related to that crime when they were 15, it had like a great effect. And I think everybody kind of wanted to own a small piece of it. I think Tony Bryant is much more problematic than a lot of the other people, and I don't believe the stories that Tony told.
no, it's so ridiculous. And what's interesting about Bobby too is he wrote an 18,000 word piece on Littleton, who of course now even the Skakels admit didn't do it. And then he's from there into a book on the cavemen. And
Wait, which Skakels don't believe? I think that theory is still floating around among some of the
I thought
Skakels
that
that I know.
I read that recently that they know that, or they admit that he's not the guy that uh,
Hmm. I hadn't heard that. I know that Stephen, I've talked to Stephen at length about a variety of
he
things.
believes Littleton did it.
No, he doesn't. No, but he doesn't believe that Littleton didn't do it. He hasn't rejected him as a suspect. He hasn't eliminated him as a suspect.
I'll add one more thing about Bobby that I thought was also a cheap shot was that here's this kid, he's from Bridgeport, he's working for ABC. He's a nobody in terms of, versus a Kennedy. And I saw Bobby on every interview say, if he challenges me, sue me. Sue me.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
he's obviously not
Well,
going to
I
sue
mean,
me.
this was one of the things. No, this is one of the things that I noted in the podcast, which I found very ironic considering what happened to Michael, which was, neither of these guys were actually interviewed by authorities. And Bobby said in the book, which was it was Bobby's book, which
Yeah.
I helped him with. But Bobby said, "I believe beyond a reasonable doubt that these guys did it." And I said to myself, beyond a reasonable doubt, that is a huge leap. I mean, to say that they should have been interviewed, to say that the fact that both Mickey and Frank Garr could have driven 7 minutes from his office and interviewed this guy, had one interview with this guy, and he chose not to. It's not that he didn't attempt to. It's I did not I did not agree with the title of the chapter, The Killers. I think
Yeah.
it was I don't think it's fair to tar Bobby as a racist because this tip came to him, and I think regardless of the race of the person, if he had heard this story, I think he would have forwarded it because it seemed.
I don't want to be appearing that I'm accusing him being a racist. I just think putting up a black guy, your father was one of the civil rights heroes of the country. These guys were highly likely not even in Greenwich, and you say very highly unlikely, and it just seems that to me seems really wrong. I don't think he did it out of racism. I think he's trying to find a way to get Michael on.
Well,
And after Littleton didn't work, he went
Jeffrey
on to
Toobin
these
wrote
guys.
4,000 words in airmail about. I mean, I think that has been kind of the line on Bobby, that this was racist for him to mention this. And Jeffrey Toobin wrote.
I wouldn't make that claim, but I think it was very, very
Well,
wrong.
Jeffrey Toobin wrote 4,000 words in airmail and failed to disclose that the person who had brought the tip to him was also in fact black. Uh, I think it's relevant. I think it's relevant that this was a tip that came from Tony Bryan, a black guy, about another guy who happened.
The important point is he has no credibility and he's a liar, happens to be black. Again, I don't see the racism thing. I just see it as a nice patsy. Let me ask
Well,
you this, because I
yeah,
talked to Bobby about it and I still don't totally understand it. There were jeans and sneakers found that were in the wash that maybe had a speck of blood on it. Maybe they were Michael's, maybe they were Littleton's. And when I asked Bobby about this, he went into this. There were two sets of sneakers or two sets of jeans, and it totally lost me. Do you know that story? And what is the correct
well, I
version?
mean, I think it's really interesting, and I feel like, and this was another thing that I would have loved had Len Levitt lived
Yeah.
to talk to Len about. I mean, there were sneakers that were recovered and ultimately lost that had come out of the Skakel house. They were, I think, notably, and this was something that Frank Garr, when he tells Len Levitt in his book that these jeans that he thought had blood on them and it had a hair on them,
Yeah.
would never have fit Ken Littleton. They were Wrangler 36, and if you look at the photos of Michael Skakel would have been swimming in a 36-inch waist. So
Yeah.
these jeans that I think had a hair on them. There's a photo in Len Levitt's book showing the sneakers, and it says a pair of tennis shoes found by Greenwich Sanitation Department workers in a garbage bag outside the Skakel home less than a week after Martha's murder. The stains were tested as potential evidence, but the test came back inconclusive. That is
Okay.
not true. They did not come back inconclusive. They came back as conclusively boat paint. It looked like possibly blood, and there was also a hair on these jeans that was found that was a blonde hair that I think Len Levitt and Frank Garr made great hay about, saying that it could have been that it was consistent perhaps with the Martha Moxley hair. It was ultimately tested, and the mitochondrial DNA showed that there was no relationship to Dorothy Moxley. This was not Martha's hair. So I think that it's a great red herring, the jeans and the sneakers. I
Do
don't
you,
know about the second jeans. I think Bobby might be talking about a pair of jeans that was shown to some witnesses that was found in, I don't know, in a garbage can somewhere in Westchester County. But I think that was just a tip that somebody had gotten, and I don't think it actually probably has any relevance.
if you assume that Bobby was just like Trump grasping for something straw that he could create reasonable doubt, do you have a sense of why Bobby did this? I understand that he was a drug addict and Michael saved him. Is that the reason? Because he's essentially putting his reputation on the line and accusing two black people of
Well,
killing.
well, well, one is black, one is not black. It's people often say they're from the Bronx. They were actually from Manhattan. One was black and one was white.
Okay.
Possibly some
Yeah, I don't
Asian
see the
heritage.
racism as the issue. I see as two guys that had nothing to do with it.
I think Bobby, I mean, I think Bobby felt like he had solved the case. I think that Michael was very, very helpful in when Bobby got
Yes.
as Michael did with many Kennedy family members, that the Kennedys and the Skakels were estranged for many years, and I think Michael was one of the people who actually sort of got these families back together. And the reason
Yeah.
was that many of the Kennedys heard that they had a cousin. Michael, I think, was the first of them all to get sober, and he invited them all to AA meetings. And Michael and I've been to a place that they had private AA meetings in Westchester County. Michael and Bobby, when they were still talking, they're no longer talking. But I think that he developed early in his sobriety a very, very close relationship with Michael, a relationship that was derailed with Michael's involvement. Michael ended up getting very close to Michael Kennedy, who was at the time Teddy Kennedy's 1994 campaign manager.
Yes.
And the Kennedy family blames Michael. Michael claims that he was not the source for going to the press and telling the press that Michael Kennedy had been having a relationship possibly began at 14 with a family babysitter. Now, this scandal ended Joe Kennedy's career. This was one of a couple of scandals, but this was the biggest scandal because Joe Kennedy knew of this relationship and did nothing about it. Knew that Michael Kennedy was not only sleeping with a babysitter who was very young, and he was probably 39 or something at that point, but also happened to be the daughter of one of Joe Kennedy's biggest campaign contributors, ironically. And this caused a huge media war in Boston. And I think if you look at it, and if you look at the articles around the time, and I talked to the Boston Globe reporter who covered it, the Michael Kennedy scandal ended Kennedy's. Which Kennedy am I talking about?
Joe.
Joe ended Joe Kennedy's career. Joe Kennedy was about to run for governor. Ethel Kennedy had anointed Joe as the person who was going to carry on the Kennedy family tradition. Bobby certainly couldn't. Bobby basically was, I think, considered smarter than Joe, but Bobby had been arrested for heroin possession, and there was no campaign for Bobby to be had. So, Michael, as I say in the podcast, and he's convinced of this, and Bobby attributes this to paranoia. Michael is convinced that the Kennedys had a hand in his prosecution, that the Kennedys may have had a hand in getting Don Brown moved from the case to allow for Jonathan Benedict, who would bring it against Michael. I
Wow.
don't know. I do know that there was strong motivation for the Kennedys to not want Michael Skakel to be talking about them. And Michael was at that point peddling a tell-all book because he was doing battle with these people,
Yes.
peddling a tell-all book. And if you've read the proposal, you can see that the Kennedys would not have wanted that book to be published. And the book was not published because Michael was right around that time, a grand jury was convened to try him for the Martha Moxley case. So Michael's convinced that the Kennedys had it out for him and that they had a hand in him. Does
Interesting. So,
Bobby has said specifically he doesn't think that to be the case. Does Bobby, I know that Joe Kennedy was really angry at Michael. Did Joe Kennedy do something that Bobby didn't agree with and Bobby felt some residual guilt? I don't know.
and so you're saying Bobby and Michael are estranged now?
Yes.
Wow. After he wrote that book?
Yeah. It is
Wow.
that I'm not going to get into the reasons for that, but I mean I think that you know the story of the ski wax and the wrecked Jeep, and the stories are not dissimilar. It is a very dysfunctional family on both sides, and yeah, they haven't been talking.
Pretty unbelievable. How are you have an obsession for the case, right? Where is your mind at now? And are you able to deal with the fact that you can't get beyond reasonable doubt? I mean, was Michael upset that you didn't out and out exonerate him?
Well, Michael, I think at my suggestion and at the suggestion of Stephen, Michael has severe PTSD, which actually, ironically, is not from spending 11 and a half years in prison where he saw horrible things, but the PTSD was diagnosed as a result of his time at Elan. Michael is very, very high strung, and Michael, when he talks about the case, tends to spin off and become obsessed with details. And knowing Michael, I said, I think the last thing you're going to want to do is listen to this podcast, and he hasn't.
Okay. Has he asked? Has he asked if you exonerated him or not? Or
Well, he has a girlfriend who I think sort of kept him up, and I think that he appreciates what I did, which was I think something that nobody else was able to do, which was to make the real case for him, to not be to at least there be major reasonable doubt. I just don't think he did it. I mean, that is the thing that I'm most certain of, that Michael Skakel did not kill Martha Moxley. And I hope that comes through in the podcast. And to get NBC behind it, they had to look at everything. And I mean, that was a big swing for them. This was NBC News that put their name on a podcast, which I think argues pretty conclusively that Michael was not the killer.
what does Stephen think of it? Because he obviously would have watched it.
Um, I think Stephen and I are still in touch. Stephen was very supportive of the podcast, and what Stephen has always said was, "Look, there's going to be stuff in. This was before the podcast out. There's going to be stuff in it I know I'm not going to like, but we just want to be given a fair shake because nobody's given us a fair shake before." And having read Len Levitt's book, having read Mark Furman's book, having read everything that Dominic Dunn wrote about it, having seen what Nancy Grace said about him on TV,
Huh?
saying that his DNA was found at the scene, I think he's absolutely right. This guy did not get a fair shake. That there was some assumption that he was guilty, and the media basically just piled on and selectively chose material to
All
show
right.
that.
Well, let me ask you this. You make reasonable doubt, on it, and all those things you just said, maybe not a fair shake and all that. But how do you make the move from that to he didn't do it?
All right, maybe I shouldn't have said I know he didn't do it. Among. I think he is less likely than either Tommy Skakel or Ken Littleton, who were at the Otter Rock House at 10 o'clock on Mischief Night in
Okay.
1975.
All right.
Michael was not there.
Yeah, because that's what I got from your thing. I didn't get the definitive. I know Michael.
No, I no. Look, that's the thing is that I'm more comfortable saying that I'm confident that Michael didn't do it than I am comfortable saying who did it.
Um, how's his health and everything? Is he things doing well for the guy? I mean, he looked when I went to the trial one day. He looked terribly unhealthy and overweight and flushed.
Oh, he
Ironic.
weighs like 100. He weighs out like 160 pounds now. He's tiny, but
Okay, so
he had
he
he
lost a
had heart
lot.
surgery, and there's a period there when he was really, really. I was worried about his health. He was in the hospital for a long time. I think the surgery took much longer. And he was really frail for a long time. He'd been feeling bad for a lot for probably 6 months, and they brought him in and they did emergency surgery essentially. I think he's better. I don't think he's in great health, but I think he is not the guy. He looks about half the guy that went on trial in 2002. He's very small.
That's nice. Is he able to work?
Um, is he able to work? I mean, I think that what he's gone through psychologically would make it difficult for him to do a variety of jobs.
Hmm.
And so I don't know if that's the first thing in his mind. I think that he lives with the idea that every time he walks into a room and people recognize him, they think that he's the guy that killed Martha Moxley. I think for a variety of reasons it's hard for him to work. So he doesn't have a full-time job.
What do you think that you're going to do next?
Looking for another case. I don't know. I
It's
don't
going to be
know.
hard to top. It's hard to top, right? Like Madoff with me, it's very hard to top.
Yeah, it's really, I was anticipating this because, I basically made sure that, as soon as the podcast ended, I had my psychologist in place, my psychopharmacologist, because I knew that there was going to be a major crash after this, because I knew that working on it, there was going to inevitably be some kind of
Yeah.
I didn't want to slip into some depression because I just didn't know what the hell to do with myself. But I mean, the truth is, I just don't know what the hell to do with myself. So I'm trying to, I'm going to be doing a live show in Westport on June 24th at the Westport Public Library, and the podcast was a big hit, and I'm wondering if there might be interest in me talking about it more. I don't. I think there's more work to be done, and I just. I feel so strongly about the case, and I'm sure you felt this way about Madoff, that following it and not feeling like a huge letdown is difficult.
Yeah, I was lucky because the Netflix happened right after that, so I was intimately involved in that. What I think is tough is that you probably have this too. Once you've done something like that, you've had a huge success in this. You don't want to do some little rinky-dink shit, you know. And so right away, your odds on finding that are pretty slim, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm just not going to go do a project to do it. It's going to have to be big. Doesn't have to be Netflix. Doesn't have to be famous or anything. But it's and so, I've tried three or four different things and it's tough to find, you know?
Yeah. No, I've had people approaching me about a variety of cases, and I listen to them, and I'm like, it's just it ain't Skakel. It ain't this, because this thing is so rich, and I still have my hopes up that it will become a docu-series and a scripted series. But I mean, I really feel like the case is so rich because it's not only a whodunit, but it's a whodunit that's peppered with not only not only Kennedys, and Kennedys, many of them doing bad things, but also, I mean, I really see it as like as an outgrowth of the O.J. Simpson case. It's basically like it is the characters, these great characters from the O.J. Simpson case. We wouldn't be having this conversation if Dominic Dunn had not leaked the Sutton report to Mark Furman, and had Mark Furman not used Michael Skakel to have a second act in which he was for the first time not viewed as a villain but an avenging angel. I mean, I think it's a really, really poignant story in a lot of ways, and
It is.
I still
It is. You're exactly right. It wouldn't have happened without Dominic. Why do you think Mrs. Moxley was totally convinced it was Michael?
I talked to Amanda Knox about this thing, and and I talked to John Moxley, who didn't want to go on the podcast.
Right.
I think that there was, from Mrs. Moxley, a great craving for closure.
Yeah.
And also, as she said, in the mid '90s, when she did, when the case was cold, and Len Levitt went on Unsolved Mysteries, and Len Levitt went on Unsolved Mysteries and basically said he thought Tommy did it. This was years before he wrote a book that said that Michael did it.
Right.
But I think Mrs. Moxley said at that point, I think somebody in that house knows something and they're not telling us. And I frankly wonder whether they've actually thought about it in this way. Well, first of all, I think that there is a psychological relationship between prosecutors and victims' families, which is
Yeah.
if a prosecutor tells you, we've got this guy, we've got him dead to rights, we've got a great case against him, why is the family going to say, no, you've got the wrong guy? They get behind them. And as with Mrs. Moxley, I mean, Mrs. Moxley and John Moxley, as I've heard from other people, did not want to get involved, I think for obvious reasons, in the nitty-gritty of the case, including, the certainly wouldn't want to see the autopsy reports. And I think that they kept a distance because it would have been too difficult not to keep a distance, and allowed the professionals to take care of it. And the professionals were telling it was the right guy. But I also think that there's some element of, if it's not going to be Tommy, let it be another Skakel. Somebody in this family has to pay for this crime. And that's kind of the way I think about it. And, what's very interesting to me, and I interviewed John McCrate, who worked for David Moxley at Touche Ross.
Hmm.
And, it's not a particularly well-known part of the case, but while he was working for David Moxley in the New York office of Touche Ross, and he created basically a sort of base camp where he was trying to help David Moxley and the Greenwich police, because he had done some consulting with the Detroit police before, and so he
Yeah.
knew about police work, and he had been working with David Moxley to get the Greenwich police to concentrate on it. He brought in, the police chief from Detroit to come in and look at the case. He was trying to get, because he knew that the Greenwich police was not going to solve it, and he was trying to basically put pressure on them, bring other agencies in. And John McCrate told me something very different from what John Moxley told me. John McCrate told me, and he was much more intimately involved in the case than any of the Moxleys were, as the Moxleys representative. He said, I still consider this case to be unsolved. So he was not confident that the state had gotten the right guy.
Yeah,
And I'm certainly not confident. I mean, I honestly, I think, you asked me about the revelation. The revelation, I think, was this story where Frank Garr says 18 months before Michael Skakel is brought, before Michael Skakel is brought in for the grand jury, that 18 months says that I have 99.5% certainty that it's Tommy Skakel. That to me was a revelation. That a guy who wrote a book about knowing all along said 18 months before the grand jury that he was 99.5% certain. You don't see that in his book.
was
And
that
I
Len?
think,
Who are you talking about?
well, this is the quote that Frank Garr gave to Len Levitt.
Frank Garr. Okay, okay.
Yeah, Frank Garr gave to Len Levitt saying I'm
But he
99.5%.
also he was confident Littleton did it at one point too, wasn't he?
Frank Garr was behind many of the tricks that they tried to use with Mary Littleton to get her husband to confess. I find it very, very hard to believe that there wasn't a period of time when Frank Garr wasn't as convinced as this box Jack Solomon that they had their killer in Ken Littleton.
Yeah.
So he's changed his mind a lot of times in the case. So he went from certainty that it was Ken Littleton to certainty that it was Tommy Skakel
Yep.
to expressed certainty, at least to the public, that he was confident that it was Michael Skakel.
I know that Len Levitt felt I couldn't, I didn't really get from him which one he was confident it was, but he was confident the Skakels were liars, is what he told me. He knew
But
I
I
was
just,
with
I
Tom.
just, I just, I found, I think he was in a situation where, that was somewhat different than mine, which is that his name was on the book.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that Len Levitt should have written a book that actually expressed the confidence that he once had that Tommy was the guy. I think that he wrote a book about this long, finally cracking the case and it being Michael Skakel. And I just don't think that based on what he told you years later, that he was convinced that Michael was the guy. And so I just don't, as a journalist, I just don't understand how you could put your name on a book that is irresponsible in that way.
All righty. Well, Andrew, I really appreciate this. You're very nice to have done this and given me all this time. And
Oh, it's my pleasure. What else? What else do I have to do, Jim? I'm waiting for the next big one.
yeah, I know. And I just think it's just very amazing that you ghost wrote or involved with Framed, and then were able to do something so independent. And because you went through this looks bad for Michael, then you went through it, and this looks bad for you didn't hold back really on any of the stuff. I would have I told you I couldn't watch it at first because I was sure you were going to be able to do another Bobby thing where you were going to pull bullshit out of the air and I mean even
This way thing was, look, I've been, I wrote for the New Yorker once, or a few times, and people complain about the fact checking because it ultimately saves their bacon, but it is so painful to go through the fact checking with the New Yorker. And I found the NBC fact checking to be a level above that, where I was literally pulling my hair out trying to find stuff for them.
I had to go through
And
the same thing with Netflix because I don't know if you know this, but Netflix, Joe Berlinger's documentary before mine was the Jeffrey Epstein case on the book that James Patterson wrote. Okay.
mhm.
Now, James Patterson has sold 400 million copies of books. And it turns out his research was totally shoddy on the Epstein, and Netflix got sued. So I come along and, I would be there for the day. And then the next session I was there, Netflix had all these questions. They wanted to make sure. Joe said they were certain my book was fine, but they were checking everything after having been sued for the James. And I respect that. I met a woman recently who was a fact checker for Vanity Fair. So we were
Uh-huh.
talking, I'm not naming names, but some big writers, right? And she could tell me which ones were honest and which were sleazy.
Yeah. Well,
Not,
Dominic Dunn,
you'd
as
be
I'm going,
surprised at the names.
yeah. Well, Dominic Dunn, as I'm going to get into in my show, I've discovered had some real issues and managed in very creative ways to skirt the fact checking department and was highly dishonest, especially with this case. But no, when I went into NBC, I basically said, look, there were errors in the Kennedy book was quick,
Yeah.
and it was not fact checked, and there were errors, and I feel like there were a lot of people that had very valid reasons for not taking his assertions, um, not accepting his assertions because they could point out other errors. And I said to myself, this if I'm going to do this, this needs to be from a fact perspective unassailable. And I believe, look, it's 12 hours. There's going to be probably a couple of minor mistakes, but I really do feel like it's as close to unassailable. There were no shortcuts. I think if you listen to it, I hope you can agree that the reporting is honest. And I also knew that, there was a certain challenge, and I think people on social media, some people don't want to listen to it because of the association with the Kennedy book, and I feel like, as I said to them, as I said to the Skakels, this is going to be a different thing. I don't have a dog in this fight, really. If I find something at this point when I'm starting this project, I don't think Michael did it, but if I find something, and I looked at a lot of stuff, and I looked at everything, and I talked to a lot of people, if I find something that convinces me that Michael was the guy. And again, the Sissy X report to Rushton Skakel that Michael might have thought he did it. This was something that gave me pause, and we dealt with it. And I believe Michael's explanation for it. But I said nobody is going to listen to this thing unless it's actually journalistically really responsible. And I think it really is.
I think it definitely is. As I said, I was surprised initially. But did you risk did you reputational risk when your name was attached to Framed?
I was my name was not on the book. It was in the
No,
acknowledgement.
I didn't even know you were in it. But you're saying people didn't, some people didn't want to watch because of your association with it. You've said that it's not fact checked. You've said there are errors in it. Did you worry about that? Or after the fact, do you worry about,
I
especially,
think whoever's name is on the cover of the book has the responsibility to worry about those issues. If this was something that had been important to Bobby, this is something that Bobby could have dealt with. I had a specific job, and it wasn't, and it was to do something very quickly and to do a lot of research very quickly.
okay,
Um,
so you viewed it as this was something that I was paid to do.
yeah, it was a job. And look, it's easy to say, oh, you're in the tank for the Kennedys because you worked for Bobby. But the truth is that I would not have been able to do this project had I not met the Skakels. I gained their trust, and I think that they saw that I was different than Bobby, and they trusted me, and I stayed in touch with them, and they trusted me. They don't trust journalists. I mean,
Oh, they don't.
the fact that Michael spoke to me, was a real coup. Nobody's ever heard him
It's
speak before.
a total coup.
How did you get Madoff to speak?
Again, by luck, I was interviewing a woman who'd written a book that Andrew had cooperated on about the family life, nothing about the scandal. Okay. And growing up and all that stuff. And the woman, for some reason, said to me, well, would you like to talk to Andrew off the record as prep for your interview of me? I said, holy shit, and this is at the height of everything, him being hated. I get him on the phone, I attack him right away. He totally disarmed me, by telling the truth about the fact that, yeah, you're right, I should be giving money back and this, that, and the other. So we finished that. Coincidence, Ruth is moving from Florida to Greenwich. And I said, Andrew, can I take Ruth out? And, Ruth and I have lunch. We hit it off. She introduces me to Bernie. Bernie tells me, going on my son and my wife, I'm going to talk to you. Meanwhile, by the way, Andrew never spoke to him again. So he didn't speak to Andrew. And the rest was history, 400 pages between the two of us. So it's kind of like you in the sense that the family trusted me because remember, they had no editorial control. I was on CBS Sunday Morning right before it came out. That's when they found out if I found out they were involved or not. And to this day, I'm still the only guy who said that they did not know,
Yeah.
based on the research I did. But they didn't know me. Andy's girlfriend, who gave me a lot of access inside the firm, told me, I don't believe to the depth of my soul that Andrew knew. If you find it, I'll accept it. And that
Yeah.
still gives me chills, you know.
Yeah.
And the first time she learned was she and her father watched the interview. So, I give the Skakels a lot of credit. too, because you did your job. That was not a, you did your job. You presented
Um,
everything objectively.
well, I appreciate that, and look, the compliment, coming from you means a lot because I knew as soon as you reached out, and I know you've interviewed a lot of the characters who I feel like I have very strong feelings about. Mickey Sherman, chief among them. I still, Mickey, I think is in a home now. I think he has dementia, but I
I
wanted
was
to interview
wondering,
Mickey.
did he talk to you now on it?
No, no, I reached out to his son and I reached out to him through his office, but I think he's been in a home for a while. I think he's had
Okay, I didn't
memory
know that.
memory.
It's funny because he likes to talk. So I thought he might have tried to convince you. But something, it's funny you say that. When I interviewed him afterwards, and he was very good in the interview, but you'd see him around he looked really bad,
Yeah.
like something had happened, whether he got into drugs or he just didn't look well. He
Yeah.
was he was coherent though with me, and he was,
I
uh,
mean, there were things that didn't get into the podcast. I mean, I don't know if we included this in the podcast, but I talked to one of Michael's friends, and they would gather in the morning for trial at Julie Skakel's house. And there were a couple of occasions. Stephen told me there were a couple of occasions where he was convinced that Mickey had not gone to bed before trial. Mickey liked partying at Elaine's, and I think Mickey loved to be associated with a high-profile trial. And
he totally abused the Skakels. He'd go out to L.A., as you say, for the red Vanity Fair bullshit, and he would
he
one interview with related to the case and write the whole thing off, you know,
yeah.
as well as his
He
tax.
had his Harley Davidson shipped at Rushton Skakel's expense to the Breakers Hotel, which is a 40-minute drive. I mean, ostensibly to be spending time with his client. The Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach is a 40-minute drive to where Rushton Skakel was living. He did not have to be staying at the Breakers. They would
No,
have
I
he
blame
would
the
interview
Skakels
Michael.
for I blame the Skakels for not realizing who Mickey really was, and also let's say he was competent. Forget, he had nobody around him. They had Vito and Al and whatever, three people in his law firm. You can't handle a case like that with four people. It's absurd,
Well, I think having listened to Mickey on your show, and he was, I think, not as sharp as he was during the case, but seeing him in front of the courtroom, Mickey was a great talker, and Mickey, as a good talker, created great confidence in people who listened to him talk. And I mean, I think there's a reason that they're called confidence men, is that they give people confidence. And Mickey, as Michael told me, and as Stephen told me, Mickey said, as soon as they hired him, you're never going to see the inside of a courtroom.
it's a
This
slam
is
dunk. Yeah.
it's a slam dunk. They're not even going to try you for this.
I just think Mickey's lazy. I think the day I was at was his closing argument or something, and he's going, Michael didn't do it, doesn't know who did it.
Yeah,
That's not a defense,
yeah, yeah,
It was,
yeah.
and of course, I do think he thought it should have been a slam dunk, you know.
I mean, he very explicitly expressed he wanted to be his. In his memoir, he says that basically he had to do law because there wasn't enough money in being a game show contestant, which was his first passion. And he just realized the money wasn't steady enough, so he got into law. And Mickey said basically, I'm going to. This case is a slam dunk. They have no evidence, and I'm going to pursue a career in being on television and in movies.
It's yeah, it's just kind of a sad.
And one of the things that was most appalling to me actually was the cover story in Greenwich magazine about him, in which it's obvious that Mickey is feeling bad for himself after the loss of the Skakel case, and I
That
think
was definitely genuine, and I
well, that he was feeling sorry for
I think he
himself.
did it for Michael too. I think it was I think he was.
It seemed less it felt like he was feeling more sorry for himself than he was for his client who he had failed.
I don't know.
And he
He felt
wasn't
very bad.
actually.
I thought it
What's
was
that?
real that he felt really bad for Michael, and that he felt really bad that it was genuine that he felt bad. And
As well, he should have. But I think that what he should have said was, here's the number of ways that I screwed up this case. The ways, in one of my episodes, I go through each one of them. First
yeah,
of all, I shouldn't have put a cop on the jury. He should have started there.
that was ridiculous. And no third party culpability, and no Mike and no Tommy.
No,
Uh,
Tommy.
it's just, it is, it's fine. He was too arrogant about it and everything. And as I say, though, you got to say Michael's lucky in the sense that that was definitely not justification for ineffective counsel. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't
I'm
sleeping.
not a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. I
It's a
feel like
very
I would have
straight, it's
taken.
a very tight window thing.
Uh,
It's no defense. The guy's drunk, doesn't show up for meetings. Mickey had a defense. It just wasn't good, you know.
well, again, I'm not a lawyer, and this is the same argument that Jeffrey Toobin made, that the judge was looking for an excuse to let an innocent man out of jail. So
I don't
in
know
this
about
case,
that. I don't know about that, but it is, and you yourself, habeas is like a 1% chance,
yeah.
And you know what I think is fair? Let's say Michael did it, which I think. If the Skakels, if they let him, he would have gotten off in 5 years. It would have been all over. The Moxleys would have had the answer. They decided not to do that. If you buy that, 11 years was a fair sentence for him. So he got a fair sentence in the end if he did it. He didn't need to do
So
the
what's your? I just said I'm just trying to like. So when was Martha killed? If you think Michael did it, when did he kill her?
when
When?
950.
So you think he didn't go?
I guarantee you, my mind. First of all, on my Madoff thing, I have to prove it, right? So I
Hmm.
can't prove it. I'm not. So don't confuse those two. I don't believe he went. I never believe he went. I thought on hormones and fucked up. Saw petting. Saw them in the bushes. He runs around, which is what Julie saw, and then forgot. Then you say, well, the odds on that 950. It's because he picked up a
No,
golf.
Julie. Well, Julie said she. This was one of either. I think this was a 1975 interview where she said, "I don't know how big this figure was. I couldn't see who it was. The light was on in the car, so it was unclear. I called out, Michael, come back here. This is the one piece of evidence that says that Michael was there after that Lincoln left. That is it."
I just don't believe he would have gone. Makes no sense to me. And then the choreograph looking and finding this tree and that, on the route back. I just don't believe it. And I think the only guy that would have somebody had to have the rage. It could have been Tommy if he tried to rape her. Other than that, in my mind, it has to be Michael because it's one of
Well,
those.
you should. I was on this podcast.
Tommy's just gotten sex off her. He's not going to kill her.
It's called The Consult, but they basically looked at the evidence and based on the evidence, and there was some reddening in Martha's vagina, which suggested that it was consistent with what Tommy had described as this mutual masturbation.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure. I
basically,
know that's
but
true.
before they went into the suspects, they said, we see this as an attempted sexual assault that went wrong, and that the killer was familiar with the area, so familiar that whoever found Martha's body would immediately think that because of their association with this person that they would immediately be suspected, and this is what caused them to drag her into the bushes, to basically delay the discovery and kind of make a plan. And they said, based on everything that we've looked at, and they looked at everything, they said that it's far more consistent with Tommy's story versus Michael's.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this: if it's proven to me he didn't go to the backcountry, I'll say Tommy did it.
He didn't go to the backcountry. He went to the backcountry, Jim.
I
He
know.
went.
If that's
He
proven to
went.
me, I will never believe it.
This family is as dysfunctional as they come. The idea that these brothers have been keeping this secret. This is a family that is not known for its executive functioning.
Yeah.
Somebody would have said it.
Well, isn't it true that John on the stand said he no longer remembered?
John did say that on the
I think
stand.
it's in your podcast even.
Yeah, John was not a great witness.
Yeah.
Uh, Benedict said that it was because John was basically, this was not his initial testimony. John was responding to testimony that he was unprepped for at the grand jury. He went into a grand jury and basically they said, "What do you remember about a night when you were hammered 20 years ago?" And he said, basically, "I don't remember anything. I don't remember who was in the car. I remember that we went. I don't remember who was there. I don't remember whether Jimmy Terrian was there. I was drunk. I was high. Basically, we could barely drive from one place to the other." John remembered nothing from that night. It wasn't that he specifically didn't remember Michael being in the car. He remembered nothing, and he was not prepped with before he went on the stand in the grand jury with his prior with what he had said at the time. And I think he said specifically, "What I said in 1975 was an accurate assessment. I don't remember." And if John said after 22 decades, I have had my nights where I've had quite a bit to drink. Let's say 2 years ago, and I tried to remember the specifics of it. If I'm being honest, I'm going to say I do not remember. John was being honest on at the grand jury. He'd not been prepped. He had not seen his prior. He had not been before. I think that they maybe showed him what he had told police while he was on the stand, and I think he blew it. He should have said, "This refreshes my recollection. What I said in 1975 is true." He was not a good witness, admittedly.
By the
He
way,
said, "I don't remember," and I think that's truthful. And I think that nobody really probably remembered. I mean, everybody was drinking heavily.
yeah, but then how can you say you know he went to the backcountry if nobody's testimony is
He didn't
reliable?
say he didn't say that he went to the backcountry. You mean how do I think that he did?
Yeah,
Because nobody saw him. Because at the time, this is what all the police, including when they were interviewed separately, all of the kids said he went to the backcountry. This was not. I don't believe that this is a family capable of putting together this kind of conspiracy to say that Michael went. Michael was a pipsqueak. He was obviously problematic, but he was not somebody that the police, I think, would have taken one look at and said, "This is the guy that killed Martha." And
you think
look,
do you think you were seduced by Michael?
no, I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that that's fair. I think that
I don't think your work shows that. I think the work is very fair.
no, I think I like Michael. Michael is challenging in certain ways. But no, I don't think I was seduced by him. If I had seen anything that suggested, again, I've said I spent a lot of time with Michael, and there are times when he goes on and goes on. His stories are always what's remarkable to me is that the stories that he tells, and he tells stories, he repeats stories over and over from a variety of periods in his life, and these are not things that are related to the murder, and they are
I,
always consistent. They never ever change. And if you know people who lie, and I think it's remarkable when you look at like the difference between what Tony Bryant said, which was Tony Bryant said initially he saw Al Hasbrook. The only time after the murder he saw Al Hasbrook was in New York. And initially he said he was working at a movie theater. And then when I talked to him a couple years later, he said Al Hasbrook was homeless he didn't see him in a movie theater. He was homeless in Central Park and his mother gave Al Hasbrook money. And I'm like, this is a person who is just making this up. With Michael, it's always consistent. And that actually has made me think the longer I've spent time with Michael, the more I believe he is incapable of lying about it. So you may think that he blacked out. Michael Skakel is convinced that he didn't kill Martha Moxley. I think that this blacking out notion is ridiculous. I don't think he was there.
yeah.
And I am convinced based on everything, and I think that the evidence that probably should matter most is the evidence that was taken early in the investigation and the statements that were taken early in the investigation when everybody agreed that the brothers who were in the car agreed that Michael was there. And if you want to claim that there was some sort of grand conspiracy, that's fine. This is what Mark Furman claimed. I just, having spent time with his family, this is not a family capable of keeping their shit together.
I don't believe that at all. I don't believe there was any kind. In fact,
Wait, so if there was no conspiracy, there would have had to have been a conspiracy then to say that he went.
I will say this though, that I do, if you know a lot about alcoholism, um, highly linked to denial and an ability to have denial. And you couple, and I think it's characteristic within the family about, the ability to deny. And just like, and the Kennedy family has it too. They are instinctively protective of the brand. And I just have a feeling that if Michael, it possibly consisted between blackout, rage, and denial. And I don't think the family wanted to believe that one of them could have done it. I don't think Tommy wanted to believe that one of them could do it. Your podcast is the first time I've heard Michael say he didn't believe that Tommy could do it. Um, and I just think there's a denial factor that comes inherent to the Skakel genes, and it's linked to the substance abuse and everything. But
I
again,
think the
I'm
recovery
talking
process, I
conjecture.
think from my
I can't.
understanding about the recovery process is it is trying to counteract this denial that alcoholics generally have. And I think that, Michael got himself in trouble, I think, because especially after he recovered, that he shared everything.
Yeah.
And, he's got a big mouth. And if he hadn't told that story to the guy that was going to write the tell-all book about the Kennedys, we probably wouldn't be in this situation now. I mean,
He
I
would have
think
had
that,
an airtight alibi forever if he hadn't put himself at the crime scene. And you got to remember, anytime you put yourself at the crime scene, you put yourself at the crime scene. He had an airtight alibi, and it's a weird thing, and it's an obsessive thing, and it's related to Martha. And Tommy wasn't masturbating up in the tree. Tommy was getting action right off of her. Um, you know, uh,
well, I don't think that, I think that in Martha's diary, she very specifically says that Tommy is misunderstanding my intentions. I mean, Martha did show up at the Skakel house twice that night, so I think that she was possibly ambivalent about Tommy, but she did record in her diary that there was a certain level of discomfort about Tommy's grabbiness. In
and
the
he's very charismatic, and he can
Yeah, and he was
definitely.
very handsome.
Yeah, and he has a way with women and all that, So yeah, and I do think Martha, beautiful girl. Everybody said a great girl, and guys can be totally teenagers. I'm sure we're misreading her cues pretty easily,
Well,
because
she very specifically says it. She says Michael actually says, and this is something that this was the entry that was used as that the prosecution used to show that Martha was afraid of Michael, which shows it does not to me seem that she thinks that she's afraid of Michael. It seems that she's annoyed by Michael. But Michael says, I think it's possible that Tommy is getting the wrong idea. Are you leading him on? How do you feel about Tommy? And she says very specifically, I don't feel that way about Tommy. I think he's getting the wrong idea. Uh, you know, I think that it's very possible that Tommy had might have had the wrong idea.
but again,
Uh,
it was mutual masturbation.
I mean, she was found with her
Not,
with
not
the with,
rape, not rape, with mutual masturbation. Now, I can't guarantee he didn't want to try and rape her, and if he did, you know, she tried to get home, and then he went after her. But
the theories, and they were not connecting this to Tommy specifically, but the theory that the FBI, all these profilers that have probably 120 years of experience, and I don't know how much stock you put in profilers, but basically they said whoever this assailant was needed to make sure they thought it was an attempted sexual assault, and the assailant needed to make sure that Martha was not going to report this sexual assault to her family, and they were going to make sure that she didn't.
and there's no evidence that Michael assaulted her body, right? There's so
Well, Jonathan Benedict
he's
allowed
dead.
allowed allowed a drug addict to get on the stand and say that he heard Michael say that I put a golf club through her head, and then I came back to the corpse 2 days later and masturbated upon her. This was evidence allowed by Jonathan Benedict. He allowed this. He put it in his closing argument. I mean, Martha was found. She was probably killed at 10. She was found at noon the next day. The idea that Michael is going to come back 2 days later and masturbate upon a corpse is ridiculous. And for the state prosecutor to put this in his closing argument is shameful.
His PowerPoint thing was unbelievable. But you remember this better than me probably. But that case was being lost until that PowerPoint. There's
Well, I wasn't there, so you remember it better than I do. I
there's
just had,
nobody that felt that they were going to get that was heading towards a conviction. And then he mixed the audio from the book, right?
yep.
His the dead, whatever Kennedy book or whatever it was, and he mixed that in just brilliantly. So it looks like Michael's confessing almost, you know.
Which is, I don't know. Do you think that that's, I think Leslie Stahl interviewed him, and Leslie Stahl told Benedict point blank, if I ever did this in my job, I would get fired.
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, I think it was abused a bit, but it worked, and
Hmm.
he was losing the case. You know,
Well,
it is amazing because he had no personality. He was very low key. I didn't, it came out of the blue, But I think they did all believe that Michael was the most likely guy. They're just not reasonable. It's just not beyond reasonable doubt.
I think they might have believed that because they had so little. I mean, Jonathan Benedict had to play catch up, and he had to go to trial without having had any of the experience that, I mean, the investigator who had basically devoted his life to it, you know, a year before they decided it was Michael, said he was 99.5% certain it was another person. This is the guy that had the institutional knowledge of the case. Benedict was basically Benedict. If you look at his closing arguments, he's basically parroting the Furman book.
If Michael didn't go to the back country, who do you think did it?
Again, short of, I think that there's two scenarios. One is that Tommy did it. One is that somebody witnessed Tommy and Martha having some sort of consensual thing and picked up a golf club and killed her. Who that person is, I don't know. Whether it's Ken Littleton, whether it's Peter Zaluka, whether it's other people that we've discussed in the podcast, I don't know. I think that the problem is short of evidence, and we're very short of evidence because the failures of the Greenwich police. It is impossible to say. I do know that Tommy Skakel, with Sutton investigators, put himself with Martha at the time or very close to the time of the crime. That Tommy Skakel, when Dorothy Moxley called the Skakel house before Martha's body had been found at say 3 or 4 in the morning on
Mhm.
Halloween, she would only be found at noon. Tommy very specifically, and look, it's I know kids probably don't wear wristwatches, but very specifically said I said goodbye to her at 9:30
Yeah.
and I watched her go. And 9:30 was exactly right after Helen Hicks and Jeffrey Byrne exited the neighborhood. But then changed his story and said I was with her 20 more minutes, 30 more minutes.
Yeah.
Now why, and this was something that Len Levitt brought up in Unsolved Mysteries, why, unless you have some sort of consciousness of something that happened to her after that, do you have to be so specific about 9:30? Why don't you say we at the it's not going to offend my father if we're at the back of my house and we talk for 20 minutes about, the goings on in the neighborhood and we just joke around and, we play backgammon for a little bit. Why do you have to specifically say before her body is found? Is there a reason why you can't be with her after 9:30?
Yeah, because he didn't want to admit it, anything at all. The 950, I definitely believe that. That's when it happened. But I don't have a trouble with Tommy being at 950 because I think somebody saw, and that, well, as I said, and then it came on. I told Tommy, I said, Tommy, how do you feel about really being inadvertently responsible for the death? Because it was definitely because he was having sex with her. If it wasn't him that killed her, and he hadn't really thought of it that way.
Well, Tommy, I don't know. Tommy's an enigma. I've interviewed him. I met him at a funeral recently. He didn't want to participate in the podcast. He did want to participate in the Bobby book, and I think that he probably had some knowledge of that Bobby had suspects in mind who weren't him, that weren't him. I don't know.
I think
Short
he
of any evidence, look,
he
there's no case. I mean, look, they tried to. There was an unsigned warrant for Tommy's arrest. They didn't have enough. And if they didn't have enough in 1975, they thought they had enough in 1992, and Don Brown didn't think they had enough to convict Tommy, and they probably didn't. If Tommy had had reasonable counsel, I mean, prosecutors generally, and that's why this case is so interesting. Prosecutors generally do not want to take a case to trial and lose.
It should
Uh,
not. It should not either. It should be well beyond reasonable doubt. And this case doesn't have it. You
and
know,
this case does not have it. And they
I
didn't
might
think of
bet.
that.
I might bet everything that Michael did it. but it's still not beyond reasonable doubt. He should
You'd
not.
bet anything, really, Jim? To this point, I'd see. I just, you know, I,
I think he did
I
it.
think
I'm
that's going to be
telling
my.
you, I
I
don't
think that's
believe.
going to be my next project is convincing Jim that he's absolutely wrong because I couldn't disagree with you more.
No, no, no. We agree. By the way, you don't. We agree. He should. Michael should not have been convicted. It was
I think that there's a
not
difference.
reasonable
I
doubt.
think there's a
I'm only
difference.
saying I believe Michael's the most likely one who did it. I don't believe he should have been convicted.
Mhm.
100%. That's why when you the way you finish is exactly to my mind the right way this case should go. You cannot name who did this murder,
Yeah.
and that I believe that totally. But I believe he didn't go to the backcountry, and I believe he did it. But I can't. But that's not the way I operate. I wouldn't write that. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not. And I'll say there's one reason that Tommy could have done it if it was a attempted rape rage thing. But given that this is a guy who just had sex, had been fondling with her before, and another guy who shows evidence of wanting to be obsessed about her or whatever. I know you don't, but I think he was obsessed about it. And he freaked out the minute Tommy left the scene.
But I don't know if you've looked at the Sutton report recently, but one of the things that really bothered Jim Murphy from Sutton was the idea this was a cold night. It's very weird that Michael was masturbating, but it's also weird the idea that two people are going to sit on a 43-degree night in view of, basically in a place where people could see them if they were walking by and mutually masturbate on the ground. One of the things that Jim Murphy said, when Dorothy Moxley came to the house the following day, she did something very smart, which is let's go check the camper because they had this RV on the property.
Right.
So Tommy's not going to take Martha into the camper. They're going to mutually masturbate to completion, he says, on the ground on a 43-degree night.
Yeah.
Does that sound plausible to you?
I think they were fondling. I don't, and I think the masturbation thing emerged. They were on the ground together. I can't. Michael certainly wasn't in the bushes with her, and Tommy admits he was in the bushes with her. The question is, somebody saw it, who had to have known Martha, had to be enraged by it, had access to the golf club, and then you got to explain how they're psychologically they could commit murder. The only
Yeah, but
way.
okay, but Michael had never had a relationship with Martha. Do you really think that somebody would be that jealous if their brother was getting it on with somebody they had a crush on?
I
You
believe he
do.
was. I do. I
Okay.
do. I believe he was. I believe he was. Um, that's why I can't believe he went to the backcountry. You have teenage kids. If they were in a car, they were flirting around. There's a girl they really liked on. They're going to get in the car and go 20 minutes away and watch a movie. And your brother is hitting on her and it pisses you off. Your kid wouldn't do that. I don't believe it. Makes no sense to me.
All right.
And if you and it's hard it's hard for you to say where's the evidence of obsession. He comes home at 11 o'clock and masturbates at a tree outside her room. Well, what could be more evidence? Tommy wasn't doing that, you know. But I'm not getting away from reasonable doubt. I agree with that. That's why I was happy to see how you ended, even though it's just as painful for me. I'd like to have somebody named, you
Yeah.
know, but I'd like to have somebody who plausibly did it beyond reasonable doubt. And it's
Yeah.
either Tommy or Michael. No one's going to convince you of anybody else in the world. So if it's 60-40 or 70-30 or 80-20, it's got to be over 96. It's not over.
Well, I would put Michael below. I think I probably
I
would
know, I
would
know. You put him below. You say that.
I'd put him below. I think I'd put him below Ken Littleton because again, I am convinced he went to the backcountry, and I find it really, really hard to believe that teenagers would, Helen Hicks, they tried to get her to say, do you specifically remember Michael getting into the car and going? But I talked to Helen just the other day and she was like, Michael went. Where was he if he did not go? So he's what, scampering around hiding? Maybe. I don't, but that seems so unlikely to me. Nobody saw him. Nobody saw Martha after 9:30. Nobody saw Michael in that period.
unless Julie saw him running.
She said, Michael, that is the one thing. She said, Michael, come back here. At the time, she said, I didn't know the size of the person. I couldn't tell whether it was young or old. The
Right,
way
no, I
it's been
understand. She can't guarantee it, but she said, Michael, Michael, and he's running from the bushes at the exact time that he might have seen her. But again, I can't prove that. And I don't think it's provable that he went to the backcountry. I mean, Dennis Osorio really doesn't have credibility once he puts Tommy at the backcountry.
No, he does not. No, that was I think that I think was one of the big surprises and one of the big I think disappointments for Steven Skakel especially
Yeah.
was that, that there was this confidence that they had found this witness who had seen Michael there. And he not only saw Michael there, but he saw John Dowdle or John Terrian and Tommy, neither of whom were there. So he does not have credibility. I agree.
And I think the Sutton report, I believe that the person, that kind of a killing, forget Sutton report, that kind of a killing, just like OJ, is a rage killing, must know the person intimately and have a huge jealousy rage issue. And that rules out anybody but the Skakels, if you ask me, including the Skakels on their property. It's the Skakels Golf Club. And Littleton doesn't make sense. He's not crazy yet. And he came, who's going to arrive at 5 in the afternoon and rage kill somebody? You've seen the head. You can see the 6 iron divot,
Yeah.
right? The black guys weren't there, right?
Yeah.
There's no way John Moxley killed his sister. All the guys that are, Hammond didn't do it. So Luca, I've never heard mentioned until your thing, but it's clearly somebody that knew the victim.
Um,
That limits it to two people in my mind that could have had that kind of rage. And both of those kids were highly fucked up then.
well, again, I am unwilling to say with certainty who I think did it.
Right.
You seem to think that Tommy is more likely.
Michael,
Jim Murphy, veteran FBI agent, who ran the Sutton investigation, believed that Tommy was the likely culprit. The four FBI agents who went through all the evidence thought that Tommy was the far more likely suspect. But you're
I
certainly
accept that. I accept that you cannot name one of these guys beyond a reasonable doubt. There's no
no.
doubt about it. And I also accept that if you prove to me he went to the backcountry, which I don't believe, plus his story coming back to have the detail level of someone that is lying. And I learned that when I Googled it right after saying this is unbelievable. He's describing this makes no sense. But I can't prove he was or wasn't there. And I have to be
You've
honest.
never tried to tell a story that happened many years ago, and just naturally, as when you're telling a story, there's natural kind of filling in of details that you don't actually specifically remember. You don't think that that's just human nature?
No, I think if in my entire life I witnessed or committed or heard about one murder, okay, I would not be. I don't even remember if I
But he's
drive.
not talking about, no, he's not talking about the murder. He's talking about a ride from the backcountry. He's not talking about a murder.
No, read the. Yeah, let's say he's innocent, right? He
Mhm.
finds out the next day or whatever this murder's gone on. It's the biggest day of his life and all this kind of stuff. And then who did it? He's telling this dead Kennedy book years ago. He's describing coming home that night, and it looks totally like like he's making up details to verify that.
I get that, but he's in the
You've
midst
read
of,
that. I'm sure you've read it.
no, I've read Dead Man Talking, but he's in the midst of trying to sell a book where a book is, you ever read any memoir of anybody who are describing details of events that they certainly don't have those detailed memories of? You have to fill in the blanks. That's the nature of writing a book. Um,
It's
I think that is
his
very much
alibi. It's his alibi. That's the whole thing. Of course,
okay.
I don't know if you've studied criminal stuff. Go read up on it. It says when you get a detailed analysis like that, it's often that the guy is lying his ass off. That's just fact. Whether Michael's is that qualifies under that. That's fact. That often happens when someone's been caught in a criminal thing. They make up incredible level of detail. I read that not even knowing if that was true. I had to go Google it because I said, this seems ridiculous. This guy's remembering incredible details in the
Well,
back.
I think if you Google anything, you'll also find a
Oh,
propensity
Bobby, you're right. You may be
for
right.
humans to fill in blanks that they don't necessarily know if they're trying to recall details that had happened decades before. There are certainly a lot of details that he includes from his childhood that also you could argue these were not part of his alibi, that he was putting details into that suggest that he probably didn't remember them as vividly as his memories, if you talk to a memory expert, there is a very, very natural inclination to put in details of even the most mundane stories.
Is
So if he's
there
sitting
any
down with a
reason
biographer,
why I will never understand, and I know you kind of explained it, you think that how someone who has an airtight alibi and not a suspect puts himself at the crime scene. And why would he do that?
oh, that is one of the, well, the simplest answer is, again, I've
Tell
asked him this and I approached him about this and I said, could it have been any other night? Is it possible you were just inserting yourself into the situation? I really do think that if you're 15 and a friend of yours is murdered, like Tony Bryant, like Jeff Byrne, who remembered that night being chased through the woods, like, there were other people I spoke to who said that they thought that the murderer was in their garage, that you naturally insert yourself into this drama.
yeah, but that's
And
different. None of those
and
guys.
frequently it's like the same phenomenon of somebody saying, all these people, I look at it as the same phenomenon. You know how many people supposedly were invited to Cielo Drive the night that Manson killed all these people? Half of Hollywood said, "Oh, we almost went. We could have been murdered by Charles Manson." And you know that it's not true. You know that everybody just wants to insert themselves into something. And I think Michael, who does not think clearly about things, did not realize that by inserting himself in this way, he was basically doing what nobody else had done, which is putting himself closer to the crime scene than anybody else had.
So you think 100% he went to the backcountry and 100% he didn't really masturbate in that tree?
I didn't say he didn't masturbate in
No,
the
no, I'm
tree.
just asking if you think that. In other words,
No, no, no. I don't say no. 100% no. Absolutely not.
so he did.
No, 100%. I believe I am much, much, much more confident that he went to the backcountry. No, I think that there was some masturbation. I don't think Sutton seemed to think that he masturbated to completion. He since said that he played pocket pool for a couple seconds, that he had been coming from another house where there was a woman who typically left her curtains open, and I think he and probably some other neighborhood boys would enjoy the view. And given, I know it's creepy, but given the way it was, given that we don't have smartphones, given that we have no access to pornography, given the fact that he was beaten by his father for having playboys in the house, to look at a beautiful woman undressing is weird. But I talked to a lot of other Bellhaven kids who said we did exactly the same thing.
Oh, I understand. I tell you, it's a very big thing if whether he completed or did not complete. Because if he completed, it links up to the Sutton report saying you guys got to come up with DNA. That's why
But
Tommy's.
again, he told this story in
Oh,
1987,
I know, I know. That was new
according to
news
a
to me.
prosecution witness.
That was new news to me.
Before DNA, before as Henry Lee, whatever you think of Henry Lee, I mean, he was right about this. Nobody knew about DNA when
No,
Michael
no,
was telling this story.
that was new
Everybody
news.
knew
That was
about
new news. That
DNA
was
when
new news. Yeah.
knew about DNA. And according to Jim Murphy, Tommy was expressly told by the investigator who wouldn't talk to me, Tommy, you've heard about the O.J. Simpson case. You've heard DNA is in the news everywhere. Tommy, if Henry Lee is going to reinvestigate the case, it was a bluff because Henry Lee was not going to reinvestigate the stuff for DNA. But if there's any reason that your DNA is going to be found on this girl, tell us why now. And this is when that story
He
came
didn't
out.
say that to Michael, that same speech.
Uh, to my knowledge, no.
Why would that?
But whether he said that speech or not, Michael had told the story dating back to 1982.
Yeah, okay, okay. Yeah.
Anyway,
All right, that was really it's been fascinating. And you don't see this, but we actually agree on the case. It's just who's more likely,
yeah.
you know?
I think Michael is very unlikely.
Okay.
And
Well,
maybe I don't know, maybe if you spent 100 hours with him, maybe you'd come to the same conclusion. But part of it, and I'm glad that this podcast took a long time because we basically had to get him out of legal hot water. He was not going to be able to participate if the state was going to retry him. So I had years.
But
I spent
Michael's not going to spend 100 hours with me. You're the only guy he's spoken to. He won't speak to me.
No, but I'm just saying if you'd had the
Even if
same
he knew
experience.
that I would not be biased in the sense that if he proves it, I'm gonna, I would back him. But he's not gonna talk to me.
Well, I
Uh,
wasn't actually suggesting that happened, but I'm saying maybe if you'd had the same experience, you would not think that he had not gone to the backcountry. He went. I will say it's one of the things nobody's going to change my mind
yeah,
that these Skakels did not conspire in 1975 to create an alibi for Michael Skakel.
I agree with
Um,
that. I agree. I agree with that. And but I don't feel logically he would have gone to the backcountry. But I don't know how he moved the body. So yeah, it's open
well,
question.
then you'd have to have a conspiracy because there would have to be one specific reason to say that he went to the backcountry, and that would be to protect him from prosecution. And that's a conspiracy involving John Skakel, Tommy Skakel, who said he got in the car, Jimmy Terrian, and Rush Jr. That is the conspiracy. They would have to say that he got into the car to cover him for not getting in the car because they knew that he'd killed him. So that, Jim, you are asserting that there was a conspiracy among teenagers. Having looked at Tom Sheridan's notes, were there any hint of these children knowing anything? And Tom Sheridan knew much more than Rush Skakel, and he actually basically put out the cases for, you know, Tommy and and Michael. If there had been any hint that these kids were lying and any of them knew about it, Rush Skakel certainly didn't know about it. So basically, we're talking about a conspiracy among drunk teenagers
Yeah,
deciding
I don't believe it. I don't believe.
We're gonna put Michael in this car because Michael killed Martha and he needs to have an alibi. So they all had to know it on November 1st, 1975. So in order for Michael to have stayed, you are asserting a conspiracy among teenagers. So that's your assertion.
I don't believe there's. I don't believe there's a conspiracy. I don't believe that.
Then how did they mistake Michael? Then why would they have said
I
he
know.
went in?
If you can prove it, and maybe you can. I know. I think that he was. I think he saw them in the bushes, but um, we'll see if I can get Tommy to talk.
Yeah, you
You know,
should.
he's we have talked a lot, and he's offered for years, but I won't do it. I haven't done it, and I won't pressure him, and I don't know, in the end if
I'm
he.
sure Tommy is going to say exactly what he told me, which is that he kept it for years because of the rat. He was concerned about the wrath of his father, which does not explain why he didn't just say. And he just and if you have an opportunity to interview him, that would be the question, which is, Tom, you said that you were with her. The kids left at 9:30, left you in the back. You said goodbye to Martha almost immediately after that, and she went away. If you were indeed with her for 20 more minutes, why didn't you say that you and Martha caught up in the back of the house innocently for 20 minutes? Why? That is my one question for Tommy.
I would like to probe if there was any degree of non-consensuality. Like, did you ask her? Because you say in the thing that he asked her if he could go farther, right?
Well, I mean, he portrayed it certainly with the Sutton investigators as consensual. He changed his story remarkably about how it came about because there was this weird thing where there was this pass off of keys in the front where he was seen around 9:30 passing keys to Andrea Shakespeare at the front door because
Yeah.
Julie was going to drive her home. Julie forgot her keys. Andrea went to the front door at about 9:30, which is when, and this was a great alibi for him, which was that he was seen at 9:30, so it made sense that Martha had gone, and he immediately passes these keys off to Andrea. So the Sutton investigators naturally say, okay, so Tommy, if you pass the keys off, how do we get to this sexual assignation? And Tommy says that Martha has come into the house and waited for him at the back of the house and surprises him at the back of the house. And he also says in the Sutton report, they say why would she have waited for you? And he said she wanted more of Tommy. But then he also in a subsequent interview says that he has tried to touch her breast and she has forcibly removed his hand. So there is some account of non-consensuality in his report.
Okay.
And he changes his story. And I'll say you should look at the Sutton report again.
Yeah, I don't even know where I would find that at this stage, but
I
I
can send it to you.
okay, it blew my mind the very first time I read it. But Well, I'm going to try, if I can get Tommy,
Maybe you'll have better luck with me, but that is the one question. Why do you change your story from why do you say before Martha is found that you say goodbye to her at 9:30 and not say that I was with her until 9:50 unless you know that something happened to her at 9:50? Because then he changes his story and says he was with her at 9:50. Do you have some sort of knowledge of why you shouldn't be with her at 9:50? Why don't you say Martha and I chatted for 20 minutes at the back of the house until 9:50 and then she went away? Why did they have to wait until there's a sexual component to it for him to say because he can't, because if there's any sex, it has to happen after 9:30. She's killed between 9:50 and 10. If there is any sex, he is putting himself anything after 9:30, him putting himself with her, he's getting closer and closer to the time of her death.
what, how do you explain that Littleton is convinced he showed no demeanor issues, no clothes change, none of that stuff?
Well, the cops also interviewed him and said that he basically they had to poly him twice because he was
Yeah,
showing
yeah, I
no
do. I do.
he was showing no emotion. He was showing no emotion. I don't know. All I know about Tommy is from my conversation with him, from the conversation with Michael, in which he said Michael said the reason I can't spend time with him is because he's a liar. His sister said he had trouble with the truth. Um, I think
Why does Michael think he did not do it?
because Michael said the same thing to me, which I think Tommy said to me, which was if it had been a guy and he'd been killed, I'd believe it in a second because Michael could kill a guy. Michael couldn't kill a girl. That's what Tommy said to me, and Michael said this exact same thing. Tommy didn't have any trouble with girls. I could see like if a guy had been murdered, I'd say Tommy in a second, but not a girl. That's what he said.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You think they're protecting each other innately, or
Absolutely not.
yeah, I agree with that. I don't.
Absolutely not. And I don't think, I mean, initially I had a theory, which was that the family, and this, I think, actually, this is a legal question. I don't think that it really has any bearing on how a lawyer, based on ethics can, even if a family said, keep Tommy out of this, if Mickey thought that Tommy was the best defense, he would have to put on ethically the best defense that he could. And if it involved Tommy, well, that's too bad. I mean, there was this theory that, oh, the family didn't want Tommy to be involved in it, but I've seen no evidence of that.
Well, it's interesting because when I pressed Mickey, he made it. I said, "Well, Mickey, you realize
Well, he well,
you,
he said that they said nothing to him. But I mean, the question to Mickey is, did you ever have a conversation with Manny Margolis, and why were you having early defense meetings at Tommy's lawyer's office, which would seem odd, no?
but was he only Tommy's lawyer, or was he both at that very beginning, way back then? Was Manny in other words, the Skakel
No,
boys?
Manny was only representing Tommy. Tom Sheridan was actually, Michael's lawyer
Okay.
until Mickey Sherman took over. But I mean, if me and my if I had a brother and he was a suspect in a murder case, and I found out that my attorney was holding my defense meetings at my brother's lawyer's office, I'd be like, what the hell? No. This is obviously a conflict of interest. You are holding it in the office of a guy who's going to have insight into your plan, and whether tacitly or with some sort of wink and nudge, both Linda Kenny Bodden and Jim Murphy said it. Well, it's obvious. Manny gave him the job, and either Mickey intuited or they had some conversation, which is your third party culpability suspect is not going to be Tommy.
It's
There's
a good point.
no,
It's a good point because Mickey would only have had to intuit that. He wouldn't have had to, he could have drawn that conclusion without Manny having to say it.
yeah. I mean, Manny, people have said wonderful things about Manny. It seems sort of out of character for Manny to specifically say to him, keep my guy out of this. But I think that if the lawyers are having their meetings in the office of the counsel of Tommy Skakel, it's implied that
Yes.
that Tommy is not going to be the guy that they're going to
I,
use.
I, I was, to me, I was certain that Mickey was doing, he's getting paid $1 million. He's not going to convict one Skakel or get one Skakel off and put the other Skakel on. It was a big
Yeah,
mistake because he owed, he owed doing the reasonable doubt. But
yeah.
to me, he wouldn't have to even be told that. Says, well, they're spending all this money. We're going to save Michael's ass and we're going to put Tommy out on the, you know,
Well, I mean, but I do think that if there were a grand conspiracy
then you,
quarterbacked by either Tom Sheridan or Rushton Skakel, it would have been to get Michael indicted for the crime, and there was so little evidence, and then have it go as Mickey Sherman thought it would, which would be a cakewalk to victory. And then the state of Connecticut, I mean, the state of Connecticut, I could find DNA that said that Tommy Skakel killed Martha Moxley. The state of Connecticut is all in on Michael. They would never in a million years try Tommy for this crime. And if they went to trial for Michael, no way in a million years, even if Mickey used him as a third party culpability suspect, would they say, "Oh, we goofed. Now we're going to try Tommy." Have you ever seen that in a state court that they were like, "Oh, actually, we had the wrong guy to begin with. We're going to go to
no,
his
they
brother"?
would not do that. And I agree with you. I don't believe the Skakels had some big conspiracy going on. And, one of those two guys did it. That's all I know.
Yeah.
Um, I don't believe, I'm never going to believe Littleton did it. But,
Yeah.
it's a sad thing. Murdered a girl on a property of the Skakels with a Skakels golf club, and psychologically they would have had to known each other. That kind of narrows it down in my
No, it was
mind.
on her. It was on her property, but
Yeah, but have you, I've been on the property before they took the house down,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The properties are basically, it's just one,
No, it's across Walsh Lane. Yeah,
it's one, yeah, it's
yeah,
one field that's open.
yeah.
And,
But the initial evidence, the only blood evidence, was found right on the initial where they. It looks her nose was broken when she was killed, so it looks as though maybe the initial droplets of blood before the main attack suggest that maybe her assailant punched her in the face, yielding some of that blood, the droplets of blood which are found on her gravel driveway, and she possibly staggers and falls to the spot where she's beaten with a golf club, which is where the majority of the blood is found, and where she she sustained probably the injuries that killed her. And whether she was dead when she was dragged under the tree or not remains to be seen. But it was all on her property.
yeah, I mean, I would guess that it was all, the guy came from behind her. She's walking home and hit her. And it's the golf club that he hit her with right away that it would have incapacitated her. Otherwise, what you're saying, I guess maybe she turned around and he punched her because she saw it. I don't know. It's to me, hitting her with the golf club over and over. And think about it, that thing went all the way through the neck. That's rage.
Yeah,
Her ear was all the way through her throat.
it's horror.
Pure,
Yeah,
unadulterated rage.
yeah,
Who the
it's
hell
really.
would have had that? This sweet girl. I don't, it doesn't, and then it happened on the Skakels.
Somebody who either had, well, I think somebody that had two things. One, an incredible amount of rage, but also
Yeah.
the the motivation that this person will never be allowed to tell what happened.
Yes.
I am
Yeah.
going to cover for my crime by basically eliminating the one witness to it.
Yes. Yeah. You're right. Maybe there's a rage thing. Hit him a couple times. Said, "Holy fuck," Now, and then
Well, this was Jim Murphy's theory, which was that he imagined that it was possible that Tommy collected himself and is sitting in and watching the French Connection, thinking, "Holy shit, is she dead? Is she dead?" And only then went out, moved the body, and it's possible the body was moved before, but only at this point, after she was basically, breathing her last breaths or dead. Got her, did the coup de grace to make sure that she was actually dead, which is the coup de grace through the throat.
it's funny getting rid of the handle. To me, is such a joke because I mean, the fingerprints make sense, but all the clubs had the Skakel name on it. They would have been very easy to say, "Oh, the 6-iron's missing," and that therefore it came from that bag. By the way, I had a Greenwich cop tell me that he'd heard the Greenwich police chief stole not stole, took the handle.
Well, that's Mark Furman's theory. I don't think
Is
that
it
really holds water.
doesn't
I
make
think
it doesn't. Yeah, it's very hard to believe that.
Mark Furman asserted, Mark Furman found the first youth police officer on the scene who said that he remembered, and he was a guy who was admittedly very queasy and didn't want to look at the body, but looked at her and basically ran off and threw up in the bushes. But basically, he said, I have a memory of the club coming out of her head, and there was no injury like that to her head. But he remembered the club at the scene, and this was Mark Furman's this was one of his big scoops that made all the papers. And Mark Furman did not have access to the autopsy photos or the autopsy reports, and I saw the autopsy photos, and I saw, oh, I know what this guy saw. This guy didn't see a club coming out of her neck. This guy saw this hair, this bunch of hair coming out of her neck, which it's hard to understand what it is until you're told that it is
It
a
looks
cake.
gross. It looks just terrible, to see it. It's just,
Yeah,
but it just confirms all those pictures. This is rage. This
yeah.
is overkill. This is just, crazy rage. And if Tom had that, fuck him off.
Yeah. Well, good luck getting Tommy.
Yeah, well, I know. Andrew, thanks for your time.
All right.
We'll stay in touch, okay? And
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
congratulations on a good job.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Take care. Have a great day.